Mr. Andrew Macdonald. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Alec. It's honor, pleasure, grateful, and excited to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm so stoked to have you. I was joking with you before we clicked record that hopefully this conversation can be uninterrupted, because the last one was with my wife and kids on the second leg of a 14-hour trip to Colorado. So
beautiful family.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And as kids are, when they've been cramped up in a car for a long road trip, they were a little bit let's say unhinged. Maybe that's a little bit too much of an extreme word, but they were not wanting to sit down for dinner.
They were being children.
They were being children.
Who had been cooped up for a long time.
Exactly. You can expect that. And they actually did great on a 14-hour car. And it's funny enough, our 6-month-old now was 3 months old at the time or something like that. Brand new baby. 4 months old. And he did better than my two oldest did, which
he wanted to sleep.
He just wanted to sleep. Exactly. So I'm really, really excited for this conversation, and we have a lot of stuff to discuss with this. I think it's best to start with your journey and background. And I'll preface this by saying I've explored what is colloquially referred to as the common law space. That's become kind of a catch-all term for anything that is not typical commercial or admiralty or maritime law, right? And any alternative approaches to how to deal with the legal system and our relationships to the government. I've dived into it quite a bit over the last few years, and I've heard musings of equity, and equity being the appropriate path and equity being the most honorable path, kind of using Aikido rather than having to fight and things like this. And as I've been diving into your course, it's just reverberating inside my chest how much this is pointing towards something that is true. And for me, when I look at health and the various claims coming from the medical establishment, I often use the phrase, the burden of proof lies on the individual bringing the positive claim. And I use specifically the positive claim because negative claims can't be proven in and of themselves. But I've come to find out now that that is actually a maxim of equity. So that's been very surprising. I'm like, oh my gosh, this just makes so much sense. And it makes sense to be coming from the position of not having to prove one's own claims, which is what you see a lot in the common law space. Again, colloquial common law. What you see in the common law space is people trying to sort of shove down the throats of various enforcers of the prevailing system what their rights are, trying to bring up various codes, acts, and statutes, and making a bunch of positive claims and assertions that they then have to back up. But what equity does is sort of flip that on its head. So that's where I'm at with this. It seems like this is the path when it comes to, let's say, just navigating your life and swimming in this commercial system. So I think it's appropriate, though, to start with your journey, because I know you have delved into a lot of the stuff that you now consider to be patriot warfare mode. So let's start there.
Sure. Thank you. Well, where do I begin? I think it starts in the 80s when I was a rookie firefighter paramedic trying to do a 1040 forum, figuring out how do I do this and why do I have to give the government and the IRS part of my earnings when I'm barely making it as it is. So I think that was where it led me. Then before Sandra and I moved to Colorado from Florida, we went to work for a all-natural doctor of natural medicine, who was an MD surgeon, cured his brain cancer alternatively instead of going through chemo and radiation. And anytime you're in that space, in the late 90s, we were there, he kind of leads you over into the alternative law because those people are just so attacked constantly.
Of course, especially if he's doing stuff like you just mentioned. Absolutely.
Yes, yeah. Yes. So that kind of led us there. We moved to Colorado, and it just expanded from there. We have been in this space for 26 plus years now, trying to figure these things out. following, umpteen different people and groups, and nothing really worked. Whether it was common law, secure party creditor, and we came under attack. And equity is what we're here to talk about, equity jurisprudence. And it's the only thing that's worked in all those years. Now, I'm not saying it's the only thing out there,
right?
But it's the best thing that we found, again, in 26 years of being in this space, to provide remedy, to give the highest chance of receiving remedy. There's no silver bullets out there, no matter what anybody thinks. And, no magic fairy dust, equity dust to sprinkle on your documents and make things just magically disappear. But as you mentioned, the honor part of this, there's two positions in commerce, and that's what we're dealing with here. Everything is commercial, is honor and dishonor. Mm-hmm. And equity is a way to be in honor in all aspects of your life without ever being walked on by anyone or any entity. Now, yes, you do need to learn it, and you need to integrate it into your heart and into your soul to a certain extent based on what's going on in your life. But again, it's so much easier to ask the questions, be in honor, than to make claims and then try to defend them. You mentioned common law. Common law is man's law. Mm-hmm. It even includes case law. So, that's in the system. To me, that's in the system, in the matrix type of stuff, where equity, my definition of equity, we can get into the legal definition, is the bridge from natural law, God's law, source law, over that river into admiralty, maritime, commercial law, so that people can receive remedy if it's ever needed. I call it the way forward.
Love that. So I want to comment on a couple things there. First being that I know that a lot of these other approaches that you had mentioned, ultimately, some of them that I've explored and looked into, and even some of the processes that I've done myself, it seems that a lot of what they're saying in referring to these systems, codes, acts, and statutes, and case law does check out. And it does seem to be sort of valid in the premises. And I'm not going to say that that's absolute as it goes across the board for the various processes out there. There are plenty that are coming from very flawed premises. With that being said, whether it's flawed or not, my thing has always been good luck trying to get them, quote unquote, them being the prevailing system, to fully recognize and honor what you were saying with respect to pointing out their codes, acts, and statutes in order to do various processes to correct your status, right? And the other thing that I wanted to sort of ask you, because you have had some, let's say, you've done some of these sort of what you call patriot warfare processes. Could you just get into a little bit more detail? You don't have to be super hyper specific, just a generalization of what actually occurred to you that ultimately led you to equity.
Sure. The early 2000s, we're getting involved in this patriot warfare processes and trying to figure things out. It's, beating your chest saying, I'm not a taxpayer. There's no legal taxes. You can't do this to me. Well, they showed us. We were sued by the Department of Justice and IRS in 2015. And it didn't go well using the patriot warfare processes. We did not know what I know today about equity at the time. And it didn't work. It didn't end well. Once we learned equity and went to peace with the IRS, and and that doesn't mean sending them a check or in equity's terms, it just means going to peace with them instead of being in dishonor to them. I take full responsibility for everything that's happened in our lives. We have to not play the victimhood game. And so once we take full responsibility for what happens in our lives, that's when we're truly free. But once we learned equity, we were able to go to peace with the IRS. We had very high six-figure liens on us, totaling up to even more than that. And we received certificates of releases of liens from the IRS.
Using equity?
Just using equity.
Wow.
And, 7 figures worth when you added them up. And so that was our first huge, not only success, but wake-up call, so to speak, to where, hey, there's something going on here. And then to continue the story, because of the situation we went through, some guru down in Georgia said, hey, I'd look for abandoned homes in my area, and eventually a judge will, give you a title to it, which, title that's another rabbit hole to go down. But so started looking for some abandoned homes in our little town, did administrative process, newspaper, clerk and recorder recordings, and mailings. Next thing you know, I've got cops knocking on my door with a warrant for my arrest. I was charged with 3 felonies, criminal trespass, burglary, recording false documents, 2 misdemeanors. I was facing 12 years in Colorado State Prison. And arrested, spent the night in jail. And started looking, I was just learning equity at the time. So I knew not to go in and argue. And knew not to go until I used their system to receive remedy. So I went in and I asked the questions. He's a judge with a doctorate degree in law, 2 prosecutors. And I asked the questions that compelled the performance in this courtroom that I wished to happen, which was, again, it took the 5th hearing, so 4 hearings, and then the 5th hearing, case was dismissed. The judge announced onto the record. And, the prosecutor came up to me before the hearing started and gave me a really dirty look and said, we're not going to prosecute this case. She turned around and walked away. When the case got called, she started to give an explanation as to why the state wasn't going to prosecute. The judge basically told her not necessary and interrupted her and said, this case is hereby dismissed. And the most important thing, he says, and all bonds are hereby discharged in this matter. His exact words.
Wow. And you're facing 12 years.
Yes. Now, again, I don't want to sensationalize this. I probably would not have gotten 12 years.
Yeah, but that was like the maximum thing that you were facing at that time.
Yes. And he would bring it up every hearing. Andrew, you're facing 12 years in prison. Please let me appoint you an attorney or go hire one. And I would ask the question, Judge, don't attorneys simply atone for the dead? Why would I want an attorney? And atone means simply to do something for, and that's what attorneys do. And they are representing the fiction, the all caps name, which you've had numerous people talk about there. We can go down those rabbit holes if people wishes to, but it's basically a fiction. It wasn't created by us. You can't, in my opinion, you cannot copyright it. Can't copyright something you didn't create. But anyway, and I tried to use that. I didn't do it perfectly. I went in and made mistakes. I brought my birth certificate in just to see and said, Judge, here's the defendant. No, please do not do that. That did not work. It's not yours. That's not your property. That's theirs. So, but anyway, yes, that was huge in my life. It was life-changing to be able to hear those words. And, talking about the victim mentality, obviously I felt that, initially. Got out the next day after being arrested and then going through the IRS and what the heck is going on here? But to hear this and to hear that and to start to put this really all together has been life-changing, not only for me and my wife, Sandra, but for many, many people around the world.
That's what's been incredible about diving into your course and being a part of your group too, is seeing all the other people who have achieved remedy using equity, discharging a variety of things, whether it's a court case or an IRS tax debt or a credit card, or really there's several other things that I've seen just in the chat and hearing testimonials from other people, which we can talk about later. But that's what's really appealing to me, because again, going back to what I said, there are several processes and approaches to quote unquote status correction that I have looked into that do seem correct in their premises. But again, trying to enforce it seems like you're using their system to play in their system to try to get them to recognize and acknowledge that you're correct. Sometimes with these approaches, offensively trying to litigate in multiple ways to try to achieve remedy. And sometimes it does work after 12, 18, 24 months of litigation offensively. And that just does not sound like something that I want to spend my time doing. I would rather employ equity when necessary when they approach me, because I just want to be left alone. I want to be living in peace and in honor. So it's been really cool to hear that. So we're kind of dancing around the term though, equity. We've already thrown it out a few times. So what is equity jurisprudence?
Equity, the legal definition of it is justice by fair dealing, but that justice definition can be taken on, expanded to everything in life. You know, everybody's heard, who's been in this space any length of time, has heard this famous Supreme Court case, Erie Railroad versus Tompkins, where it basically says, it says many things, but everything is commercial. Mm-hmm. So, and again, I've already talked about my definition of equity is that bridge from natural law, God's law. Our rights are granted to us by our Creator. I know what they are. They don't need to be in a Bill of Rights written down or anything. But that equity is that bridge over to the Admiralty Maritime Law when needed, when life throws curveballs at us, to bring remedy, to give us the highest chance of receiving remedy. Equity, and I talk a lot of spiritual aspects of equity as well in the courses, and when I'm talking to people about it. And equity is just a higher vibration, a higher level of consciousness than the patriot warfare that we talk about, the lower vibration, the arguing, the testifying, the you can't do this to me vibrations. And it just resonates a lot. It resonated so much with us, and it resonates a lot with people who are hearing the common law remedies, or the fight it, or stacks of green cards or registered mail. I mean, can't tell you how many of those we threw away, after we learned equity from the years of on the other side. So that's how powerful this is. It just resonates so much better than going to war, because they have the guns, they have the badges, but equity, like I said, it's not 100%. Equity does what it says it will do 100%. You mentioned the maxims. Maxims, what's a maxim? It's a principle that's chiefest. Nobody, no judge, no agent of a three-letter agency can argue with it, because it's chief. It's acknowledged by all. And that's what makes it so powerful. And it's not about making the claims to those maxims. It's about using them in your entire life to live in honor without ever getting walked on, but to compel performance, to receive remedy in everyday life. It's not just a matter of taking care of debts or courts issues and things like that. My favorite story when learning this is when I really started to integrate it into my life during COVID. Sandra and I were at a restaurant in our little town. Across the parking lot was Cricket Wireless store, and I needed to take care of my cell phone bill. So I walked in there, and manager runs to the door, says, "You have to leave." I said, "Why?" "I just need to take care of my cell phone." "You have to leave. You don't have a mask on." I said, in a very calm tone, not argumentative, not threatening. I said, "Are you a doctor?" She said, "No." I said, "Are you an attorney?" "No." I said, "Are you attempting to make a medical legal decision for me that I'm one required to wear a mask?" And I'm not anti-mask. My background's in medicine. I've worn thousands of masks over the years. And she said, "No, I have a child at home, and I want to keep my job, or I need to keep my job." And I said, "What would happen to your child if you had to spend 5 years in prison for violating my rights under color of law?" And she didn't know what that meant, I'm sure, but she let me take care of my cell phone bill. So this is how you just live it every day of life, whether you're at the grocery store. I've had to compel performance at the post office before, just by asking the questions that would compel the performance that you wish to happen. So that works great out in public, just not with your spouse.
I love that. I'm going to try it on my wife, Kylie.
Yeah, not a good idea.
So I want to comment on two things real quick. For those that are listening and watching that have not turned it off yet, that are international, that are in Australia, that are in Canada, that are in the UK somewhere, let's say any, I would assume Commonwealth country, maybe in a lot of countries across the United States, or across the world rather, though. Maybe
country that has a constitution.
Okay.
Equity, I mean, we haven't tried it in the ones except the ones you've mentioned.
Okay.
Ireland, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and United States here.
Yeah. So this applies to you too. That's a really important point. It applies in all those places that Andrew just mentioned. So please don't turn it off, because this definitely applies. I know a lot of my episodes where I talk about these from an American context, people that are international, and I have a lot of international listeners, tend to turn it off. And then the second thing to note is that if you're already feeling fear rise up because you've done some of the other processes that are out there, all good. We'll get to this. Equity has solutions for that. It's not a big deal. And that was one of the first things that I talked with Andrew about, because I know people across the board who've done so many different processes and are struggling and feel like they did something that cannot be fixed, right? And equity provides solutions for that. So from my understanding, equity is this sort of ancient, if you want to use that word, law form. And I guess, where does it come from, and how is it still valid and recognized today? Because I think for a lot of people, the assumption, which is what lands them in pointing to codes, acts, and statutes, not only to justify what they're doing, but when going into court, like, look, this code, this act, this statute says this, is that it's published somewhere, right? It's published, and it's in the minds of the individual doing that, probably, I would assume the judge recognizes this or understands this because it's in their own codes, acts, and statutes. Whereas equity, I'm not going to say it's not in there, as you've shown in your course. Like, we can point to various things that validate equity, but it's not necessarily uniformly written in one place where you can go look it up. So what makes it valid and recognized, and how old is equity?
Sure. At least thousands of years old. I mean, it's noted in times of Rome. And it progressed from there to where, the kings wanted their subjects to be treated fairly. They paid their taxes, they were subjects. But the strict rules that the king might lay down, those codes, rules, regulations, statutes, they many times were too strict and didn't fit the situation that these people were in. So the kings appointed another person called a chancellor, who employed equity, who could supersede or overrule or make void the lower court's rulings based on looking at the big picture. My favorite story to use this is, picture someone 2,000 years ago riding a horse, and the Roman soldiers caught him speeding, and so gave him a citation. Had to show up in court, and the judge, at the time, looks at it and says, "Yep, you were speeding. Pay the fine." Well, that person could ask for a redress to a chancellor, and the chancellor could look at the big picture and say, "Well, the reason the horse was speeding because someone just blew off some new Chinese fireworks, 2,000 years ago, and that's what made the horse speed. So this case is voided, and you're free to go." So that's where my history, of equity research kind of started, and it's progressed since then to where, even in the United States, there were actually chancery courts in the late 1800s, and that ended basically with Erie River versus Tompkins, because the money changed when they took away the gold and the silver in 1933. The laws had to change because we no longer were able to pay for anything. You can only discharge debts dollar for dollar, as you may have seen in HDR 192 and Public Law 7310. So because of that, the laws had to change, and equity knows that. So all these things that you've learned, if you've been in a space any length of time, the rules, the money, equity knows all this, but you don't have to. Equity doesn't require that you argue it. Those maxims are written. Equity is available. One of the huge ones is equity is there for in any fiction of law. Everything they do is a fiction. Everything. The government's a fiction. It can only deal with fictions. That's what, in my opinion, started this whole thing. It wasn't just about control, but it was. But with the estate, with the all caps names, the capitis diminutio maxima, which in Black's Law Dictionary, all caps name is the most comprehensive loss of status. By definition, the legal definition in Black's Law Dictionary. So, I'm not against status correction most of the time, state, national. If someone feels inspired to do that, fantastic. But like you mentioned, how do you defend that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, it's written, but a judge has wide
discretion.
Thank you, to do what he or she wishes to do. And so, but when you're asking them the questions that compel the performance to hear case dismissed, case discharged, whatever, how powerful a question can you ask for them to do the right thing? Equity says equity does what ought to be done, and won't what equity doesn't aid a volunteer, and so forth. So that's the power here, is to attorneys are taught to move the court, and patriots who want to act like attorneys are taught to move the court by filing motions that assert certain codes, rules, regulations, and case law, i.e. common law, to try to convince a judge to rule a certain way. Equity doesn't do that. Equity moves the court by asking the questions that the judges don't necessarily even, that follows their rules without stating their rules.
Yeah.
Mostly their banking rules, because everything's banking, everything's commerce. That's one of the hats that judges and magistrates and commissioners wear. Is one of the ones they're a judge, magistrate, or commissioner, and the other is they're a banker. Besides a priest as well. So that's the difference here. We're not trying to convince the judge; we're compelling, and it's very, very powerful.
What I love about that, going back to the burden of proof thing, is by continually asking questions rather than making statements, you're shifting the burden of proof to them over and over and over and over again, rather than you making a statement or an assertion and trying to back that up with some more paperwork and things like this. And again, don't get me wrong, and that's why I wanted to preface this whole conversation with what I said. I'm not denying that some of the processes out there to correct your status might be true and valid. Not at all. There are many that aren't. Let's put it that way. There are many that people get in trouble with, or even if it is valid, they don't know how to defend it, so then they end up getting in trouble, right? And it's that equity is putting you in a position where you don't have to come in and make statements. In fact, you would recommend not making statements, and it's more about asking the questions that compel the performance. Would you say that that's correct?
Absolutely. And that's if you even wind up in a court to begin with.
Right.
What I teach is, like, I don't know, putting a guess on it, 98% of issues would never happen if you brought equity from the get-go. A lot of people come to us, they're already in some kind of issue, having an issue. They're already getting the threatening letters from the IRS or some taxing authority, or they're already being sued. But many come to us just because, again, they want to learn how to live in honor without ever being walked on by anyone or any entity. Equity allows that. It's freedom. It can be true freedom. But also, this isn't, you mentioned status correction again, is that equity, you already mentioned equity requires no particular status in order to provide a remedy. So if you feel inspired to do that, then hey, I would still learn equity. Mm-hmm. But if not, you don't have to if that doesn't resonate with you. And I teach people that live your life the way you want to. If you don't have to get rid of your driver's license, you don't have to do this, and this, to try to get out of the matrix. If you want to, you can. And again, in my opinion, you better know equity in case you're ever challenged on that or tested on that. And so, yeah, it's been life-changing for us and for many other people.
You mentioned the money change that occurred, and you mentioned something else, that we can't actually pay for anything anymore, that we're discharging. That's going to sound wild for anyone who's never really come across this before, or maybe just dipped their toe into any of the common law and the colloquial common law space, that we can't actually pay for anything. And I'm sure if people have studied money theory and understanding that when our money was taken off the gold standard, it became currency, and it became fiat currency, which is backed by debt. But you're going above and beyond the typical explanation and saying that we can't actually pay for anything. We can only discharge. And that also applies to the greenback currency that we are using, the dollar bills. That sounds wild to people because we see that all over the place, like pay for this, pay for that. We describe it as, I had to pay for that, or I'm going to go pay for this, or that cost so much. It was really hard to pay for that. We use that term so much, but we're not actually paying. We're just discharging. So can you talk briefly about what occurred in 1933, what occurred in the 1970s with Nixon, and then also describe how that means we can't actually pay for anything. We can only discharge, and that even applies to the dollar bills that we are all holding.
Perfect. Yes. So in 1933, obviously the Constitution says no state shall make anything but gold and silver for the payment of debts. Well, then why do we have these Federal Reserve notes in our wallet, or Canadian dollars or Australian dollars in our wallets and purses? Because pretty much every country around the world, my research shows that around that time, every constitution took that ability away. Why? Because they needed to be able to print more dollars than what they had gold and silver or coins, those metals to back them up. And when they did that, obviously they violated the Constitution. So, there's all kinds of acts that leaded up to it. Federal Reserve Act of 1913, Trading with the Enemy Act, 1917, Emergency Banking Relief Act, 1933, which that was part of it. And the Trading with the Enemy Act, Emergency Banking Relief Act are kind of brother and sister. They work together, where because of the way they were written and amended, actually made in this country commercial enemies to the United States. Not violent, as long as we're not acting that way, but commercial enemies. And then with Erie River versus Tompkins case in 1938, where this was somebody was walking on railroad tracks and got hit with something hanging off the train, open door or something like that. And the case went to the Supreme Court, but they're questioning, okay, well, is there any federal common law? Or, it mentions the law merchant, which is the precursor to the Uniform Commercial Code, the UCC, that so many people talk about out there. And so that progresses. So they started giving us greenbacks, as I mentioned. They say right at the top of them, Federal Reserve note. And so if you look in Black's Law Dictionary, I only use their books. I use Black's Law, 6th edition, is considered the commercial law dictionary. I use Levine's Manual on Commercial Law, which is Levine was a New York CPA attorney back in the early 1900s who wrote a book on this as well. And Burton's Legal Thesaurus, 4th edition, which has all the synonyms for all the legal terms that are in Black's, as well as the maxims that are may be associated with that name. But if you look in Black's Law Dictionary under for the definition of the word money, it says, as you mentioned, currency, coins and paper. But it says it excludes notes, bonds, and evidences of debt. So the United States Federal Reserve note, right at the top of those paper things in your wallets and purses, has 2 signatures on it and either a red or a green number on it. So it's a bond. And those 2 things, note is a debt, a bond is a debt, net evidence of a debt. So 3 strikes and those FRNs, Federal Reserve notes in your wallets and purses, do not fit the legal definition of money. Also, I mentioned HJR 192, which is the congressional act. Now, acts are not law. They have to be promulgated properly through the Federal Register in this country, and then they finally make it to the Code of Federal Regulations. But that talks about debts, both private and public, shall be discharged dollar for dollar. Now, that's the verbiage they use. So yes, that word pay or payment the definition's been changed over the years, just like so many others, even here recently. And, when talking about with friends and family and stuff, yes, we still use that word. Yeah. But if it's something official in a document or a credit card statement or mortgage statement where it says payment, a CP71C from the IRS, it says on the voucher payment, they're telling us that's what it is. And
this form is a payment. That's what they're saying?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they're screaming to us, that it's the payment. We just have to learn how to do it right and to be able to discharge that debt. And again, we have personal story with the IRS, and good now. But my opinion is they don't need the fruits of your labor. They don't need a check. They don't need your. It again is about control. But they're the largest debt collector on the planet. They're CPAs. They need to balance their books. And if you give them what they need to balance their books, our history shows is they will go away and leave you alone forever. And very possibly stop volunteering with them, stop contracting with them. Again, I mentioned our rights are granted to us by our Creator, God, but the contracts that we've entered into through our lifetime supersedes a lot of those rights. And equity allows us to fix that issue in an honorable way, not arguing, not testifying, but to give them what they need to discharge, if that's a debt, or just to go away, whatever is needed.
And so correct me if I'm wrong on this. What we're saying is that there are multiple ways to discharge debt, but most of us have only been, let's say, miseducated to think that it's payment, and that payment only comes in the form of the greenback currency that we have, or digital representations of it.
Yes, or written, a check.
Or a check, right.
Sure.
Yeah, or a check.
Yes.
But what we're getting at is there's multiple other ways to go about discharging that debt.
And I forgot to mention the final nail in the coffin was with Nixon in 70-71, where he completely took us off the gold standard. So, no more, not even backed by gold at that point. So it's strictly based on the full faith and credit, and which with us being chattel, basically the commercial energy to keep the system going. But so there was a book that one of my students sent to me not too long ago, and it was published in 1888. It's called the Theory of Credit, and in it talks about that that money, or substitutes for money, which basically what Federal Reserve notes are. They're not money; they're a substitute for money. Can discharge debts. In fact, what people thought of money or think of money is infinitesimal. That's the word it used, compared to other ways of discharging debt. And the number one other way that this book mentions, and I don't even remember the other three, novations was one of them, a new contract, was acceptances. If you look on a banking website, acceptances are a liability upon the bank. And equity knows this. And if you do it properly, you can't just write accepted on and send it in and think it's going to discharge the debt. And this is
what's out there where people are talking about acceptance for value, like that method specifically.
Well,
right?
Acceptance for value is, in my opinion, a patriot made up phrase.
Yeah.
You can't find it in UCC. You can't find it in any legal law dictionary that I found, at least. So just accepted or acceptance is a banking term.
Got it.
So this is where I talk about, we use their rules and laws without us stating them.
Right.
But yes, the big problem with that is you have to be very careful that you're not creating money. Banks are the only ones licensed to do that. So I've got stories about that where people have done that and it didn't end well. They wound up behind bars to do that. So you have to be very careful that you're not doing that, and do it honorably. And this isn't just about getting out of debts. They took away the gold and silver. They created a fiat system where what does food cost right now? People can't even afford to buy food, and that's part of the system, part of the control. And so this is equity is just, again, bringing remedy when it's necessary to bring remedy. It's not just about getting out of things. You're not gonna discharge your credit card debt and charge that card back up the next month. That would be dishonorable.
You're settling and closing the accounts.
Equity wants to settle and close the accounting on whatever the matter is. Yes.
Yeah. Honorably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we're not arguing. We're giving them in equity, we're giving them the commercial energy to discharge the debt. So it's not about arguing or saying validate the debt. They don't have to validate the debt. They have your signature. There's a contract. You've used that plastic, and your signature could be a checkbox on the end. They don't have my wedding signature. Well, they don't need it. Look up the definition of signature in the law dictionary. It can mean
what does it say?
It can mean your signature that everybody thinks is a signature, but it can also mean a checkbox. It doesn't say on the internet. I'm paraphrasing. Checkbox on the internet. Something lithographed from one document and put on another document, digitally or copy machine or whatever. Anything that you grant as representation of you can be legally considered your signature.
While we're on that point about the various contracts that we've gotten ourselves into, knowingly and unknowingly, there's a few questions that I have related to that. Because for me, strictly philosophically speaking, when I've learned the 6 or 7 tenets of a contract, some people say 6, some people say 7. When I look at us in our relationship to the state, that fictitious entity, I really reflect on, well, there's multiple, if not all of them, that I've gotten myself into. They don't actually meet the tenets of a valid contract. But with that being said, and I don't know if this is relevant according to your education and understanding, education in the term that you actually have learned something, not education in a fictitious legal sense. Is that even a valid argument at this point, or is it that consent versus assent comes in, like where you're in a contract that you don't know, but you're acting as if you knew, so that's assent? Where do you stand when it comes to the contracts that we're in and their validity?
Sure. There's a maxim that says consent removes error. And if you look in the law dictionary, there's the definition for unilateral contracts, where you're the only signature on it. So those prefaces of the validity of a contract, they can be brought into an argument and let a judge look at it and say, well, yeah, but again, there's enough. My favorite example is a promissory note. If you bought your home and you sat down across from that table from the title closer or at the bank, and whose signature's on that promissory note and the other mortgage documents is yours. There's one on the back from a vice president of the bank or somebody that says for deposit only, but that's a unilateral contract that you sign, that if you don't abide by it, that you're going to be in the streets or living back with mommy and daddy or something, in a foreclosure. And so yes, there doesn't have to be all these things, in my opinion. Again, in a legal sense, there's supposed to be, but in the real world, doesn't have to be. Your signature is the only one on our driver's license, and that definitely is a contract. And you mentioned other contracts. There's adhesion contracts that go along with that driver's license. If you've ever been called for jury duty, they usually use that from the driver's license or voter registration pool. And so there's tons of other contracts out there that are adhered or adhesioned to ones that you sign. But yes, there's definitely something to the unilateralness of a contract where you're the only one with signature on there. This is why, going to court to, suing a bank, suing a mortgage company because of that promissory note. Mm-hmm. We can dive deep down that rabbit hole too. Doesn't work because, the judge looks at the promissory note and the mortgage documents or deed of trust and says, Mr. John Doe, is this your signature on here? Yes, it is, Judge. Case decided for the bank for several reasons. First of all, you sign a contract, and second of all, he or she's a banker, and they're going to protect their own. So equity gives us a remedy for that. And again, it's no silver bullet out there. It's going to take a process,
especially when it comes to securitized debt, I'd imagine, right?
Well, not always,
really?
but
okay.
for mortgages, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, because, and again, most of the time you can't expect it to go really easy. It can. We have stories of it going easy, but not always.
Right.
Again, first of all, with the value of homes, the banks want these homes.
Mm-hmm.
But the promissory note that you signed that has your signature on it was stamped for deposit only on the back. It was deposited at a commercial bank or the Fed Reserve discount window in DC, and placed into an account. They opened up an account, and that promissory note was deposited into as if you had written a check. And that's where the digits come from to go to the title company or the bank to take care of any encumbrances that are on that land right then, like a previous mortgage or whatever. And then, you purchase your home, but you sign that's mortgage documents, which says if you don't pay a certain amount over a certain period of time, they're going to foreclose on you. But your home was paid for at closing with that promissory note. It was the modern money mechanics calls it a transaction deposit, which is the same as if you had written and signed a check. So, what people need to learn is, and I read this somewhere not too long ago, it wasn't original for me, but your signature is likely the most powerful asset you will ever own. But they use it against you too. But, another famous one of my words I teach about is the word obligation. When you sign something, you're obligated. But you go to Burton's legal thesaurus, and one of the maxims says that obligations are unbound in the same manner in which they were made binding. How are they made binding? With this.
That's such an important point right there.
How are they made unbound? With this, if you know how to do it properly.
That is such an important point, because for so many people that have found themselves in various contractual agreements that they're like, oh man, how do I get out of that now? And it's the same way that you got into it, you can also get out of it, which is really incredible.
We can give them both the commercial energy, but there's also a huge equitable right called rescission. And if you look in Black's Law Dictionary, the definition of rescission is a long one, but it says amounts to the unmaking of a contract from the beginning, not merely a termination. And that's huge if you understand that, is it makes it as though it never existed. It just went poof. So very
incredible. One other question, just related to money, currency rather, is, and I don't know if this is all too relevant, but I'm just curious. There's different ideas on what backs the currency. You talked about the full faith and credit of the United States, and that's referring to the people, from my understanding, right? And there's two different ideas when it comes to the people being what backs the currency. And I'd just like to hear your thoughts on it. One is that it's through the creation of the birth certificate, and that birth certificate is then traded, bonded and traded. The other is that it's through our signatures each time we sign something that is creating more, I don't know what word I would like to use. What would be the appropriate word here? Like credit in the system?
Credit is expansion of credit.
Expansion of credit. Okay. And some will say that it's both of those things. From your understanding, what is it exactly? And again, it's not too relevant as it pertains to equity, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
It's actually both, and many other ways as well. So the birth certificate, my research shows that it's what created the estate. That's who owns that all caps name. Whatever state you were born in, look at the birth certificate, whose name is at the top state of, or whatever your birth, country you're in, whatever it says. That's who created that estate. A lot of people out there like to call it the Sesta KV Trust. But again, they created it, so it's theirs. Now, so they hold legal title to the name. The name was registered. It's, I can call it the delivery room. And again, from one of my mentors, call it the delivery room, was where mom delivered the baby from her jurisdiction over to the state's jurisdiction by signing the Colby, the certificate of live birth, or the application for the birth certificate. 7 to 10 days, depending on the jurisdiction, the hospital has to have that birth certificate, that application to the Department of Vital Statistics, which is underneath the Department of Commerce in this country and most countries. So there you go. So they created it. And yes, if you get a copy of your birth certificate, it's going to have a red number on it, most of them front or back somewhere. So it's securitized. When we first started in this space 26 years ago, we would hear that the birth certificate was being traded and was worth about $650,000. And, one of my mentors was working on trying to get people to be able to access that private side of the ledger. And somebody actually did it and sent word back to him saying, yeah, tell him that the birth certificate's worth about $55 million. Yeah. So that's what it's being traded for. So that's what's keeping the system going. But then you throw in fractionalized banking, where every time you sign a check, the banks, I mean, it's all over the place. They're not even hiding this. If you write a check for $1,000 to somebody, they're going to turn that to at least $9,000. And I've heard recently that it's now unlimited because during COVID they had to expand the money supply, to supposedly, send all these people their COVID checks and so forth. So they needed there is accounting. People say they're printing money out of thin air. There is, to my knowledge, there is some accounting associated with it. But again, we're the commercial energy behind that, writing checks. So every time you write a check, you are increasing the national debt because that money is being expanded. That credit is being expanded. And then you have all of the other things, court bonds. Every time there's a court case, there's at least 3 bonds associated with it. If it's a criminal case, there's 4, and if someone gets sent to jail or prison, that's a 5th bond. Bond is a negotiable instrument. It's a debt. It's something that's being securitized and being traded on the open markets or bond markets.
Wild.
So it's just huge expansion.
So wild to think about that. Wow. Well, it just goes back to that we are the real creditors because we're what gives life to animate this fictitious system. Mm-hmm. It is literally us. But for the most part, for most people out there, it is used against us in tremendous ways. Like our own innate power and the gold that is inside of us is used against us in so many ways. But
Agreed.
I feel like equity is flipping that on its head.
It is. And my vision here is to change the consciousness of the planet, bring that to a higher level, let people get equity into their heart and their soul. Everything would be done peaceful. I'm a member of an indigenous tribe as well, adopted. And although I do have Native American blood in me, but I'm constantly saying, hey, smoke your peace pipe. Go to peace with this. It's not about going to war, putting the warrior paint on and going to war. So yes, let's go to peace without getting walked on.
Beautiful. So with going to peace, I think it's important to understand the maxims of equity. We don't need to necessarily get into all of them unless you want to, but I think understanding the foundational principles of equity is really important. So could you just share what some of the primary maxims are?
Sure. I already mentioned a few of them. Equity will not aid a volunteer. Equity does what ought to be done.
What does that mean, equity will not aid a volunteer?
So my favorite one is talking about the IRS.
Okay.
Those of you that are old enough, remember going to the post office to get the 1040 form and that booklet. The first line in that booklet was, "This is done by voluntary compliance." Okay. Now the online ones, don't say that, and they vehemently, deny that. But there's been plenty of whistleblowers.
They let it slip
too.
out, though. There was some sort of congressional hearing or something like this within the last few years where they straight up say it.
Yes, several.
Yeah.
And yes, in fact, I usually put that in the equity telegram for everybody to see. If I haven't done it yet for this course, I for this set of sessions, I will. But yes, they fully admit that this is done by voluntary compliance. So again, one of the main maxims of equity is screaming at us to simply just stop volunteering for these things. Stop contracting. Nothing wrong with contracting, but know what you're signing. Know what you're signing up for. Don't get caught up in the custom of things. Custom's a huge word in at law and in equity. Custom is another law, but that's because our parents say it and because we go to try to get a job. And so it's customary to sign that W-4 form, which is the contract that gives the employer your agreement, your consent, you're signing on the dotted line to take the fruits of your labor when it's voluntary. So again, we teach how to unvolunteer from that and apply this into your life. Other maxims: when there is a conflict between the laws, the law and the rules of law and the rules of equity, equity shall prevail. Pomeroy was a chancellor back in late 1800s, and he wrote that equity actually can ignore the law. That's how powerful it is. Now, again, it's equity's there for us to use, but we have to be the ones that bring it. A bank isn't going to say which law firm, or a court isn't going to say, which law firm would you like to come here under? They have a duty to protect the emergency from what happened in 1933 or whatever country you're in. Australia was 33 as well. I don't remember when Canada was or Ireland, but they have a duty to protect that emergency. They have a duty to keep us in that box, in that Admiralty Maritime commercial law, and that's what they try to do. That word corrupt gets way overused out there in patriot world. Every time someone loses or the government isn't following, the word corrupt. There are corrupt agencies and judges out there, in my view, but not as many as it's being you see on YouTube University.
Mm-hmm. I think I've come to the same conclusion with respect to health and medicine, right? Where a lot of people these days are incredibly angry at allopathic doctors and scientists. And don't get me wrong, like there's reason to be angry, but it's also coming to the understanding that they're just doing the best that they know how with the information that they were given. And they don't know about the other areas because they've been in this box. They've been educated, indoctrinated really into that box. But they also recognize equity, though, which is interesting.
They, yes, they have to. It's a law form. I mean, it's listed, in our Constitution in the United States, equity is in there. It's not long expanded, but it's there. So they can't get rid of it. And that's what, again, in 1938, they started to merge the procedures of law and equity together. And that's what, a lot of attorneys and judges will say, there is no equity is not available anymore. Well, that's not true. Where equity and at law or Admiralty Maritime law were merged, they were not. They cannot be merged. The procedures are merged. That's where Black's Law talks about.
The law form is not merged, though.
The form is merged. The procedure, the substance isn't merged. The substance is what you can hold on to. The form is their procedures, the Code of Federal Regulations. They have a process that to go through. Well, equity can ignore that process. Okay, we don't do any of when we're dealing with, if we're dealing with a court, we don't have to follow their rules of double spacing and 1-inch margins and all that stuff. If I want to squeeze as much onto a page as on a notice that I'm sending in for somebody as possible, then that's what I do. That's what we can do. And that's what you can do. Anybody can do as well. We're not subject to their local customs necessarily, other than appearance. If they say you need to appear, you need to appear. You need to show up so you don't have a bench warrant out for your arrest for non-appearance, or someone goes in and tries to separate themselves from that all caps name, and the judge says, well, if that name's not here, then you're not here, and I'm issuing a bench warrant for your arrest. Mm-hmm. Warrant is a banking term. Look in the law dictionary. It's a banking term that holds also commercial energy to discharge a debt, discharge the whole case. I mean, we've never had anybody have a warrant issued for their arrest that brought equity to it and then got arrested.
Wow.
Even going to court and someone had a warrant for more than one for their arrest, several that I'm thinking off the top of my head. And the judge says, you understand you have a warrant for arrest? Yes, Judge, does the record reflect I've accepted and returned that for settlement and closure? And hearing over, cops all over the place, walks out and goes on.
Incredible. Are there any other maxims that you think are important to know?
Oh, goodness.
I know. Sorry, That's a big
question. There's so many of them. We cover that in the course, and I'm in this mode right now, so they're slipping my mind.
All good. I have one more money-related question, or just comment to make, rather. I don't know if this will come out as a question or a comment, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So a lot of people are understandably fearful of central bank digital currencies and things like this. And also a lot of people, because of that, have become incredibly skeptical of cryptocurrencies. With that being said, I think that the health and freedom space that I and you find ourselves in, people are pretty split. They either completely oppose and reject crypto, or they really like cryptocurrencies because they see this as a sort of decentralized way And some of them do a good job recognizing that it could be captured, that maybe there is some back-end hack that was integrated into the blockchain technology, et cetera, but nonetheless recognize that this is a possible solution to really decentralize the way we interact with each other and the way we contract with each other, right? And with that being said, the people who are skeptical often point to that we should be using the greenbacks instead, because this, even though that it's a debt note, it's more close to being real money than this fictitious digital currency. I've heard you somewhere else say, actually, crypto might be more quote unquote real money than the debt notes that we're using, than the greenbacks. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yes. And I meant to say earlier too, is that I'm not saying that the greenbacks, the Federal Reserve notes in your wallets and purses don't have value. They absolutely do. They can be exchanged for goods and services. Mm-hmm. So yes, they have value. I mean, some smart Alec usually says, well, if they're not money, give me all that's in your wallet. Well, no, they have value, obviously. Well, cryptocurrencies are the same. They have value, but they're not created out of debt. So that's the huge difference between the cryptos and Federal Reserve notes. The nice thing about Federal Reserve notes is not trackable, where cryptos, for the most part, are, especially if you're going through an exchange. For out of the country, for honorarium, we do accept Bitcoin, and those exchanges are trackable. I've read someone contacted me years ago about potentially helping them with this was, if I recall, a veteran who was using MMJ and other plant medicines to handle PTSD. And he was accepting Bitcoin. And in this indictment, because he was charged with from whatever statute he violated, that all of those Bitcoin blockchain transfers were in this indictment.
Wow.
So, that just showed me that, okay, yeah, decentralized. What do you mean by that? Because
right.
It's not completely private. There may be some privacy aspects to it, but there's definitely some issues going on there.
Right.
People just need to be aware of. And then the other thing that I consider too with all of that is, we're kind of preppers. So what happens if the power goes out?
Right.
So it's just the other things to consider. Everybody just needs to do whatever resonates and choice they make.
Deep sleep, or in-REM sleep, is crucial for our body's daily rejuvenation, repair, and overall well-being. And unfortunately, most people fail to get enough of this essential phase of sleep. It's responsible for some pretty crucial functions, including daily rejuvenation and repair, regulating cravings, weight loss, hormone balance, boosting energy, and more. And if you're not getting enough deep sleep, you may struggle with some of the issues that I listed. There are several factors at play, including things like non-native EMF exposure, artificial light exposure, and circadian dysregulation. But another big reason for a lack of deep sleep is magnesium deficiency. Over 80% of the population is deficient in magnesium, and magnesium plays a crucial role in our sleep, one of which is increasing gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, which encourages relaxation on a cellular level. Magnesium also plays a key role in regulating your body's stress response, and when you're deficient, you tend to have higher stress levels, which, as you can imagine, doesn't exactly help with sleep. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that most products out there only have 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, when the reality is your body needs all 7 forms of this essential sleep mineral. That's why I recommend Magnesium Breakthrough. Magnesium Breakthrough from BiOptimizers contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help calm your mind, help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling refreshed. The deep sleep benefits when you get all 7 forms of magnesium through Magnesium Breakthrough are really noticeable. And as I've shared before, I don't take a lot of supplements, nor do I promote a lot of supplements, but this is one supplement that my family is regularly using. And there's a reason that this is a best-selling product for BiOptimizers. For an exclusive offer, go to bioptimizers.com/Alec, or just head to the show notes and use promo code ALEC10 during checkout to save 10%. And if you subscribe, not only will you get amazing discounts and free gifts, you will also make sure your monthly supply is guaranteed. If you listen to this podcast, chances are you're focusing on your health and recovery a lot more than the normal human being, and that's a good thing. You might be exploring things like circadian biology, red light therapy, saunas, cold plunges, and some other things like this, but there's one thing that a lot of people overlook: the non-native EMFs in our environment. Things like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and our cell phone signals. And it's easy to overlook this thing because we don't see it, but our bodies definitely feel it. There's no substitute for getting in nature. That's going to be the best way to regulate and come back to homeostasis. But when you're spending time in modern environments, inside our houses, inside our schools, inside our office spaces, it just makes sense to harmonize that environment as best you possibly can. That's why I've got Aries Tech set up both in my house and in my podcast studio. They help to harmonize and neutralize the chaotic non-native EMFs in our environment rather than fighting them. Aries Tech doesn't block non-native EMFs, and that's an important point to make. If something were truly blocking non-native EMFs, you wouldn't even receive a signal. A lot of so-called blocking technology that's out there can actually make interference worse, and we talk a lot about that in episode 186 of the Way Forward podcast, featuring CEO of Aries Tech, Josh Bruni. I was genuinely impressed with some of the studies that have been done on Aries Tech, especially the ones that have been done on professional athletes, and you can learn all about those on their website, or just head to the show notes. We'll have it linked there. This is all about being aware of the harmful effects of non-native EMFs, but not being fearful. But more importantly, doing something, helping to create a more clear, clean living and work environment. So if you'd like to try Aries Tech out, go to ariestech.com or just head to the show notes and be sure to enter code TWF25 at checkout, and that'll give you 25% off your order. So I want to revisit one more thing to talk about before we move into discussing the IRS, because there's a lot to unpack there that I think would be very beneficial information for people to understand. And again, I want to emphasize that maybe the specifics don't necessarily apply to Australia, to Canada, to New Zealand with respect to the IRS Title 26, Title 27. And maybe it does, because I've actually heard that in a lot of ways, Aussies and Canadians can use our forms, which is wild to think about. But the point that I'm getting at is this is still going to largely apply internationally. Maybe the whole conversation does, honestly. But before we get there, I'd like to talk about some of the legalese terms that we would benefit from knowing and becoming familiar with as it pertains to our relationship with the prevailing system.
So legalese terms as far as?
Just like, what are some common legalese terms that would be good for people to be familiar with?
Well, we've already talked about contract, people consent versus assent. Consent is an agreement where basically you sign on a dotted line. You have a contractor coming over, 5 of them, to give you estimates on your home, remodeling your kitchen, and you decide to go with one. You give them a down payment, and you sign on a dotted line. That's consent, consensual, contractual. Assent is more of an agreement, but it's not signing on a dotted line, and that's equity uses assent versus consent. What people need to realize, though, is there's a legal term called acquiescence or acquiesce, to where if you stand silent when someone says something that's not right or that you don't agree with, your silence is like as if you signed on a dotted line consenting to whatever they just spewed was wholehearted truth.
Or if you get a letter in the mail and don't respond.
That too. Taxing authorities, the letter's been sitting on your desk for 6 months. Your acquiescence, your silence in them, you just agreed. Or if a banker, so a lot of people are dealing with these EIDL COVID loans that they supposedly got. We've dug deep into those, and you've heard me say on podcasts, banks don't loan money, and that's not just me saying that. That's CPA forensic auditors, that's economists admitting that banks don't loan you money when we already said there is no money anyway. So
ever, banks literally do not loan you money ever. Aren't they technically loaning you your own credit and then you're making payments on it at interest?
Yes. And what's your credit? What was your credit? This.
Your signature, right?
Your signature or a checkbox on the internet that represented you was, yes, them loaning your credit. You know, when we go down this rabbit hole, even a credit card, you apply for a credit card, $10,000 credit limit, okay? So they send you the plastic. Well, they took your signature or checkbox on the internet, deposited that at the Fed window. They received, this is my understanding how it works, they received the $10,000 in their account based on your signature, and then you swipe the plastic. You think that they're loaning you those funds for you to buy those new pair of sneakers or whatever, or that purse. And no, that's money that was put into an open account used with the commercial energy from your signature, and they're charging you interest, usury interest, no matter. So consent is huge. Your acquiescence is huge. You can't not stand silent, even if it's a banker or a judge. I started talking about the COVID loans. Somebody was on the phone. One of my students was on the phone with some administrator of the COVID loans, the EIDL loans, and he admitted on this phone that no, these were actually loans, and those COVID loans have not been securitized. And we found out recently that they are being securitized. So not only if you've got a $100,000 COVID loan, that's being traded on the open market. Plus, our research shows they didn't loan you anything that went through a bank, even went through the Treasury. Small Business Administration is a government agency. Mm-hmm. They're using some banks, commercial banks, to create those digits or the Fed window to send people checks. So yes, they have been securitized. We have the proof and the evidence now, and not that we're going to say, hey, we're going to show you why. We're going to ask the questions.
Yeah, you're going to ask the questions rather than make statements.
Why does this? Why? And we'll talk about QSIPs in a bit, probably. But yes, they have QSIP numbers.
Would you want to talk about QSIPs now?
Sure.
Yeah, let's go there now.
So there's a lot of disinformation out there right now. I call it, one of my students calls it YouTube University. So I picked it up. And about trying to use QSIPs to discharge debt.
Yeah, can you explain what a QSIP is first?
QSIP stands for Committee on Uniform Security Identification Procedures. It's a number issued, and issued is a huge word, by the Securities Exchange Commission or whatever the equivalent is in the other countries, to track every security or every investment on the open markets, bond markets, stock markets, and so forth. So it's a tracking number. What we found out over the years is that the bonds associated with the case numbers on court cases have QSIPs. So those bonds are being traded on the open market. And we've heard for years, anybody who's been in the space has heard that, Walmart buys, invests in most of the penal bonds in this country. So, but we never put two and two together to say, well, then what's going on here? So a QSIP is a tracking number for a security. But what that proves is, again, that the accounts, the credit card accounts, the mortgages, the court cases, anything to do, probably IRS, COVID, anything they call a loan has been securitized. And again, what we talked about earlier, expansion of the money supply. And that's the power. And what gave them that commercial energy? We did. And once we learn about it, now we can honorably give them, take care of the contracts that we want to. If you want to keep that plastic, that's fine. But at least now that the system's working. And yes, it's convenient, to be able to run that plastic. We don't have credit cards. So we got it. We made the choice just to come out of that part of the system, out of the matrix, and live differently.
Got it. Okay. Now I want to dive into the IRS. So we touched on it a little bit, but I want to get, I guess you could say, more specific, especially hearing that it's voluntary, right? Which I could imagine for those listening and watching that are taking that to mean, oh, I just don't respond anymore. I just stopped volunteering. But then also what we're saying here is that if you stay silent, that's acquiescence. And actually, I think from my understanding and hearing the people that just don't respond, especially after they filled out a 1040 or 1041, you're possibly, if not probably, going to land yourself in a lot of trouble there by just completely not responding.
The potential is certainly there.
Yeah.
And again, there's how many IRS employees are they hired? Supposedly 87,000. That's the rumor. Who knows? But yes. So there's different personalities, different people. So yes, as I mentioned, I was an extreme dishonor to the IRS, and they came after us. And I admit that dishonor. Equity helped me get back into honor with them again, without writing them a check or going on payment plans or anything like that. But yes, what equity says is when they or anybody that you're deciding to bring equity puts a piece of paper in front of your face, we have a liability and we have a power. The liability is to reply to it. The power is to bring equity in a way that we teach and we talk about, to settling, to give them the commercial energy back, or the notice to settle and close the matter. Because it's not just always, everything's commercial, but it's not just always about money. Mm-hmm. What if it's about performance? The building inspector knocks on your door because you just put a shed on your land without asking them permission. Okay, it's all about commercial because they want you to go down and buy a permit. Mm-hmm. Okay, but it's this concerns performance too, not just debt and money and so forth.
Yeah, got it. So when it comes to the IRS, big question: are income taxes legal from your understanding?
Yes, they are, but only because we contract to it. Some people out there, and the big argument in the patriot warfare mode is, no, they're not legal. Well, there's some aspects to it, but you just contracted to it, so that's the problem. As I mentioned earlier, you sign that W-4 to the employer, you fill out 1040s, you fill out business, for your documents for your business to, report taxes because you have an LLC, an S Corp, or a sole proprietorship. What if you didn't use those entities anymore and came up with a different entity, or set those up differently so that you could operate more privately? We talked about beforehand, getting away from some of these commercial terms like necessarily business or,
right.
Using their forms and, money or income and stop using those terms and maybe get out of that paradigm a little bit better.
Yeah. From my understanding, and should I be using the word understanding? Because I see a lot of people say, don't say understand because you're standing under.
I don't go down. That doesn't resonate with me.
Right. It's like you're using it colloquially, like sure. Meaning I've come to
use overstanding instead of understanding.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Right. I don't like saying overstanding.
I still say I'm driving my car, even though that's a commercial term.
Right. Exactly. It's a colloquial term, right? Like it just depends on the context in which you're using it, of course. Right. That makes sense. But from my current understanding, when it comes to a contract, like again, maybe there's elements of income tax that are illegal. Maybe there's elements of a mortgage that are ultimately fraudulent in some ways. Maybe there's elements of a mortgage, let's say specifically, like when I sign on that line, I'm signing with that bank, but then that bank then trades it and it's hypothecated and then like sold off, et cetera, et cetera. There might be some arguments there, but nonetheless, you signed. So once you enter into a contract, whether the parts are legal or illegal are really irrelevant. And I'd put that with a big asterisk and question mark. But from my understanding, it's that the contract supersedes any of the legal codes, acts, and statutes that are out there anyway. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's maxims that say that are definitions in Black's as well as Burton's, like the contract makes the law. So absolutely, yes, you contracted. One of the maxims that I mentioned was, consent removes error. So yes, when you consent to it, you've just given up. You've given up those creator-given rights that we were born with. And at age 16, the first one we signed is the driver's license. Where I'm not saying everybody should give up their driver's license, and statutes are there because they work, but the first time you signed up a right was for that application at 16 or 14, depending on your jurisdiction, to drive, operate a motor vehicle. We have the right to travel on the common ways, without that. Now you're going to need to know how to handle it if you ever see the blue lights in the rearview mirror, And we teach how to handle that in honor, whether you have a driver's license or not. Either one will work.
Wow, amazing. Okay, going back to taxes a little bit, I want to talk about sales taxes a little bit now as well. Are those legal?
They are legal because, again, we a contract to it, or we don't, or we acquiesce to it, which is the same as consenting to it. But there is a law, USC 31, subsection 3124, that says obligations and stocks of the United States are non-taxable by the United States or by any state or any what's the word it uses?
Subsidiary, maybe?
Yeah, something like that, of a state.
Got it.
Which is any corporations registered in a state. Okay, so they're non-taxable. So Federal Reserve notes are non-taxable, and it lists a whole bunch of them.
Yep.
Silver certificates, bond certificates, postal stamps. Now that's why you don't pay tax on stamps when you go to the post office. They're an obligation of the United States, and they're not taxable. And this goes along, all over Canada, Australia, everywhere we look so far. So yes, they're an obligation of the federal government, and they're not taxable. So then, if you go to another section of the United States Code, 18 USC section 8, it talks about what those obligations are. And again, it talks about Federal Reserve notes, stamps, and so forth. So 3134 says taxes, the obligations on the states are not taxable. Then you go down to 18.8, and it talks about what they are. And Federal Reserve notes, all of these things, stamps, and so forth, gives a whole list, are not taxable. So when you purchase something with Federal Reserve notes, you have the right not to have to pay sales tax on that. Going to buy a stick of gum or food and stuff like that. But if you're purchasing something big and it's going to be a significant amount, you have the right to get around that sales tax.
And people who've done that, right?
Yes. And there's a big lawsuit in California against the Franchise Tax Board. It was Sandra Brown versus the Franchise Tax Board, where a large big condo or something association was sold, and the Franchise Tax Board took taxes out of the amounts that were transferred. And these people sued them. The Franchise Tax Board had to give the sales tax money back to that group of people.
Wow. So that essentially proves it right there.
Yeah.
Wow.
And again, there's several things in that's common law. So that's case law.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't use that, but we can reuse equity to bring certain things like that and ask the question.
It gives context, though.
It does.
It gives helpful context. That makes a lot of sense.
It does.
So this part that I want to talk about next with respect to the IRS specifically, and then I want to kind of just visit how one might approach responding just in general to the IRS, because I know you have 30 hours of education in this course that I'm taking right now, so you can't cover all of that in this. Wouldn't be appropriate to, but I would like to talk about just in general, like how one might approach discharging something with the IRS, what that might look like in practice a little bit. But Title 26 and Title 27. So on the surface, one of them seems to be governing the IRS, right? Title 26. Title 27 is about alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, from my understanding. But those are both used when it comes to the IRS and your relationship to it. Can we talk about that?
Sure.
Because that is wild to me.
It is wild. Our research shows in the 40s, the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, was put underneath the IRS. So obviously for several reasons. Foresight, it's supposedly not under there anymore. Who knows? It really doesn't matter. But much of Title 26, and I show a chart that was given to me in the course, that under certain regulations, certain parts of Title 26, which is the IRS code, Title 26, United States, USC Title 26 is the IRS code that they use to force people, or supposedly force people, to file taxes, pay taxes, go to audits, tax courts, almost all it's in there. Much of Title 26 is either does not have regulations associated with it, which means that did not go through that process that we talked about early to be promulgated in the Federal Register, to where once something's proposed, it goes to the Federal Register so that people can speak up and oppose it or for it or whatever. And then once it goes through that process, it gets put in the Code of Federal Regulations. Much of Title 26 did not go through that process.
Wow.
So it's not enforceable to begin with unless we volunteer.
Right, unless we volunteer into the contract and then don't uphold our obligation to the contract.
Or take care of the obligation.
Right.
Rescission if necessary. Most of the time, that's not even necessary. Other parts of Title 26 were promulgated, but they're enforced under, as you mentioned, Title 27, which is Title 27 is exclusive, which means nothing else, can't be used for anything else but alcohol, tobacco, and firearms taxes. So if you're not in the business of selling or buying alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, then those codes, rules don't apply either. So yes, and again, do we argue these points? No, I put those charts in there just for reference, just so people understand what's going on here. And then we're going to handle it with equity in a more honorable way than making the claims. Because as you mentioned, we ask the questions. As king asking, though anybody who's asking the question is in control instead of making the claim. Plus, when you ask the question, you're putting the burden of proof onto whoever you're asking the question of, instead of if you were making the claim, now you have the burden of proof to prove it.
Mm-hmm.
And so Title 26, Title 27 is very powerful if we ever have to become face-to-face with an IRS agent, just to ask the questions under what authority are you calling this audit, or are you at my door, or whatever the situation happens to be.
Wow. And when we're talking about, just to get a little bit more specific on the enforcement part that is under Title 27 with the ATF, we're talking about like literally enforcing some of the things that IRS agents and things like this typically do. And I've actually heard other people say, and I don't know, this could be just speculation, that the IRS agents are actually just ATF agents that are reassigned to be IRS agents in some way. And maybe that's speculation, maybe that's incorrect. We don't know.
I don't know.
But nonetheless, it's still that the, let's say the authority, in air quotes, to enforce on behalf of the IRS comes in part or in full because of Title 27, which is the ATF. So it's really like they're using ATF functions to enforce the IRS rules under the contracts that we're in.
So yeah, down this chart, I talk about the for example, the statute to file taxes or to pay taxes is listed in Title 26. But either those codes don't have any regulation, which means they're not enforceable unless we volunteer, or that code to requires you to file a form is enforced under Title 27, exclusive to ATF. So, and as far as the agents go, the bottom line is any of these three-letter agencies that are coming out to people, have badges, they have guns on their hips. So, have to be careful. When I talk to people about traffic stops, your main goal is not to be face down in the dirt with handcuffs behind your back, getting tased or shot or whatever. So, but again, they are operating under what we call color of state law. And what's color of state law is law that's only enforceable because they have a badge and a gun or a gun on their hip. They're operating under that authority. They have a uniform on. One of our friends down in Arizona talked to some high up police officer, and he admitted that everything they do is under color. And we get deep into color and color of law. And in the course, basically, it's enforcement of laws because they have a badge or a uniform or a gun or a title. And, it's basically the Burton's uses synonyms like fake, fiend, deceit. That's what they're operating, because it is deceitful. But this is the system that we live in around the world right now. It's a commercial system, and it's broken. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily corrupt. There is corruption out there, but the system's broken. And again, my vision is to bring some saneness to it, and for people to receive remedy without, again, having to fight the system. They have the guns.
Beautiful. I think that's a good segue into, achieving remedy without having to fight or anything like this. Just as if we could, generally speaking, when it comes to the IRS, how how do we approach that with using equity?
So anytime, and this applies verbally too, but most of the time they put something in front of your face, a piece of paper in front of your face. And anytime someone does that, even verbally, it falls into one of two categories according to Black's Law Dictionary. It's either an offer or it's a presentment. Okay? Offer is something that's kind of like not threatening. I use the example of the Tide laundry flyer you get in the mailbox. That's an offer. Okay? But it can be something more serious. It can be something from an official agency. My favorite to use is the IRS CP71C, which it says, this is a reminder, you owe this amount for whatever the tax year is, that either you didn't file or you didn't complete it or didn't discharge it. And so it's just a reminder. There's no threats behind it. There's no do this or else. That's considered an offer. Then you get something that someone puts in front of your face or an agency puts in front of your face that says that do this or else, or a notice of intent to levy, or, pay this today, or some third-party debt collector on a credit card. We reserve the right to come sue you and take your assets, or the COVID loan that we're going to send this to the Treasury. Good. The Treasury knows there's no money. The IRS saying we're sending this to the fraudulent return office in Ogden. Thank you. We'll put them on the notice too.
Wow.
And so a presentment by definition is something that's demanding, a threat, a charge. And that just gets handled a little bit differently than the offer with equity. But the bottom line is they all get replied to. So even if you get that notice from a tax authority or a bank saying, hey, that you're late on a payment, then if there's no threat in it, that's just an offer. So everything we get falls into offer or presentment, and it's just handled a little bit differently with equity. Equity tells us how to handle it. Mm-hmm. They're just a little bit differently. One notice is going to be a little bit stronger than the other, and we operate on the law of notice. Okay? We don't do motions. We don't file anything. We do notice. The system uses notices millions of times every single day. Mm-hmm. What is notice? Notice, by definition, is intelligence by whatever means communicated. Mm. Okay, haven't gotten that vocab word in your course yet.
Not yet,
but we will.
Hits though. So I like that.
So that's something to remember. Notice, intelligence by whatever means communicated, and we communicate with them. The bottom line is we're not acquiescing. We're putting them on notice. And I mentioned the word acceptance. So you wanted me to get into a little bit. So basically what we're doing is it's an acceptance process done properly, done according to their rules, and with proper notice to go along with it, a non-negotiable notice that we learned from one of our mentors. I didn't learn this from one person. We've been in the space a long time. And so we've had many mentors, and I was able to put a lot of these pieces of the puzzle together, and even then I make changes to some of the notices as alumni from the courses are seeing, because I'm keeping my finger on the pulse of what's going on out there. That book, They Moved My Cheese, Move the Cheese. Well, that's what's happening out there. The system is starting to see a lot of these notices, and sometimes they send them back, so equity tells us what to do. Sometimes they dishonor the equity. Equity tells us what to do if they do that. And again, it's not fighting. It's using their rules. We would never state, UCC 1-308 above our signature. That's their copyrighted laws, codes. Okay? Well, UCC 1-308 tells us what to write above our signatures if we feel inspired to. Instead of using their copyrighted code, UCC 1-308, it says to use without prejudice, all rights reserved. So there you go. So instead of writing, for everybody out there, in my opinion, my suggestion is to stop writing UCC 1-308 above your signature, and it has to be above. Nothing below your signature really matters. because that's their copyrighted codes, or you're violating copyright, by doing that, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Again, thousands of people out there are doing it, but it tells us what to write instead.
In general, this is an interesting question to pose. Would you say that because a lot more people are interested in doing a variety of processes, some that are completely nonsensical and don't work, some that work, some that might be coming from correct premises, as I said earlier, but ultimately are not working, but nonetheless, just a lot more people becoming hip to and knowledgeable on and doing these things. Would you say that that's a net positive or a net negative?
Again, everybody's got to choose what resonates with them the most. And the other thing is, equity does not mix with other processes. So it's not going to mix with common law. It's not going to mix with, as I've already mentioned, we'll never mention the UCC. We'll never put case law in anything, any document that you're bringing equity to. That's, equity supersedes them all. So why would you use a lower vibration remedy when you've got a higher one? A common law, there's thousands and thousands of different remedies in common law. Equity has one, and it supersedes them all. So the other thing is, if you're using those other methods, which again may work, but what happens if it's a court situation and the judge gives a final judgment and overrules them? Well, then you go to appeals court and up to the Supreme Court if you have to, and most of the time that's not going to work,
especially because they're going to protect their own in most cases.
And most people don't realize, and I didn't even realize it when we were in that mode, was that appeals court just doesn't look at the facts, just looks to see if the judge of the lower court did anything wrong.
Wow.
And that was explained to me when because we were fighting it, in their system. And that's what was explained to me as to why our appeal didn't work. And, that's when we said, okay, because what equity does is, with equity, you don't lose unless you give up. Equity's there. So even if this is a judgment involved, equity can turn that around, because the judge is loaning their signature, loaning their name.
Wow.
Okay. So, and very, 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 very powerful when we start getting into the definitions of accommodation and accommodation party and surety and so forth. Those terms, accommodation parties is one who loans their name. Well, most people, you don't loan your name. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, and actually you do, you loan your signature, and they're using it on that promissory note. But the word accommodation party says such as a surety. Well, what's a surety? Surety is the one who's liable to pay for another's debt. And that's what we've become with that all caps name. It's not your name. You're using it. You hold equitable title to it. They hold legal title because they created it. We hold equitable title, so we're using it. But that all can be corrected and so forth with equity as well.
Amazing. So amazing. One thing that I think is worth commenting on, as someone who's currently taking your course right now, is that your care and attention to detail is really incredible. So I don't think that, and I don't want this to be misconstrued, that Andrew is suggesting just do as I said just now, because it's much more, it's easy, but it's much more specific than that. It's not just I think it's worth commenting on that a little bit.
So, as you mentioned, it's about a 30-hour course, and there's a lot of detail to it. I go through about 80 different words, not to memorize things, but to become familiar with some of those vocab words like accommodation party, surety. One thing I didn't mention with surety is this is what's happened with that all caps name. We've used that name, that all caps, that fiction of law, our whole lives, from the time driver's license to bank accounts to loans to tax authority forms, you name it. So because you've used that under a term that's in Black's Law Dictionary called usufruct, we're using somebody else's property, that has made a surety for that all caps name. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if we know how to use it right. and equity tells us how to use it right, is the power. We have the power of the pen as well. So yes, that power is there. So yes, there is a lot more to this. That's why it's a 12-week course to get the good foundation of how to do this. You will not learn how to do this on YouTube University. Right. There's people on there that wouldn't know equity if it hit them upside the head. Yeah. So be very careful about who you're listening to. Again, we take full responsibility. So, and again, I put this together from several different mentors over a long period of time.
Over 26 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't equity from the get-go. A lot of it was unlearning, the secure party creditor stuff. And, that's the only one I really disagree with the most. There are other remedies out there. And I know there's a lot of the Way Forward members who have worked at, and it may, great if that was successful. It wasn't for us. And again, I decided to do that. I take full responsibility. Equity just resonated so much more and gave us remedy. I mean, amazing remedies. 12 years in prison, which again, I wouldn't have done 12 years, but that's what the judge was throwing at my face every single hearing was, Andrew, you're facing 12 years in prison, hire an attorney. Why? Because attorneys weren't going to spew what ask the questions that I was asking. Judge, why does case number such and such have a QSIP number associated with it? You attempting to administer my estate without my permission. How does that not make you an executor de tort? Asking these questions. And that's, again, if things ever make it to court. If I would have known equity, back then, probably never would have done what I did, trying to, take advantage of abandoned homes, because, someone went through a foreclosure and lost that. They just didn't walk away. There was a reason, right? So where is the honor in that? And again, that may be something legal to do with a process, but something I did they didn't like, and that case is poofed. It's gone. It's
amazing though that case is poofed and gone with equity. Yeah, it's incredible. So we just talked about the IRS a little bit, but I think it's important to clarify that the same general approach you take with the IRS, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, it seems like equity is fairly universal in how you approach other offers or presentments from credit card companies, from I don't know what else. What can equity deal with, and is it generally the same approach that you would take with the IRS?
Generally is a good term. It means applies, to most situations. So yes, and the answer is yes. It's going to be an acceptance process to whether if there's a dollar amount associated with it, or if it's performance that they're looking for you to do. There's some different verbiage, in the notices that we teach to use based on what the offer or the presentment said. But yes, they're all handled the same, because I mean, we already taught in class in session 2 how to handle a traffic stop, how to handle a debt collector call, how to handle if some 3-letter agency person's knocking at your door. We talk a lot about court cases because just simply a lot of people need to hear that. But a lot of those, scripts or verbiage that we use that equity tells us to use in there can be interchangeable between them all. So yes, everything falls into an offer or presentment, and even if it's verbal, it can be, it's usually an offer, or again, if it's a demand, someone demanding that you do something. Then,
sounds more like a presentment.
Yeah, that's a presentment. Right. So
right.
So, and that's that's backing up using their terms, their legal terms. That's why I said only use, Black's Law Dictionary, Burton's Legal Thesaurus, Levine's Manual of Commercial Law, and the Bible or Scriptures. Those are the 4 books that we use.
That's really interesting on the Bible or Scriptures thing, because you hear that a lot in this space, that biblical law sometimes, if not always, supersedes all of the law forms, or maybe is the foundation for a lot of the law forms. Can you just touch on that just a little bit?
Some of the maxims of equity come out of the New Testament. Mm-hmm. I don't preach the Bible, through the class and stuff, but there are definitely some major things in there. My favorite is Matthew 5, verses 25, 26, which paraphrases says, Agree with thine adversary quickly, lest you be taken to the judge, who will send you to the jailer, where you will stay until the debt is paid in full. Well, what's that telling us? It's telling us to stop arguing, stop testifying, stop fighting the system, go to peace with it. And once you learn this and get this into your heart, you'll acquire freedom and receive remedy if life throws something at you like that.
Agree could almost be a euphemism for accept.
What can?
Agree. And that could almost be a euphemism for accept.
It's actually a synonym.
Yeah, synonym. Yeah. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. Exactly. My other favorite is Revelation 18:4. We're called to come out from my people. So this is, besides equity and trust law are brother and sister, so they go along with each other. And so we, for those who, not in the equity course, but those who are interested, we actually teach a separate trust, PMA, and ministry course.
Got to get you back on for a part 2 just to discuss
that. For people who want to bring their endeavors, their enterprises, getting away from those business commercial terms, into more of a private world.
Mm-hmm.
But if not, equity's still there.
Amazing. Just real quick, off the top of your head, what are some of the things other than IRS, tax debt, and credit cards that that some of your students have discharged?
So any taxing authority, those states that have, or countries that have state income taxes. In Australia, it's the ATO, and Canada, it's CRA, Canadian, I can't remember what R stands for, authority. And so taxes in general. Court cases, even child custody cases.
Wow.
To where, again, equity does what ought to be done. So equity is going to help. The spiritual aspect of equity is going to help the person that's supposed to have those children have those children. One example is we had a father who was trying to take custody. He had been charged with domestic violence, beat the children, beat his ex-wife, and he took some courses on the internet and thought he was all healed. Children are still scared to death of him. So in court, bringing equity to the matter, and case, it took a while, took a year, but case dismissed.
Wow.
Traffic citations,
SBA loans.
SBA loans, again, the banks don't loan you anything.
Yeah.
So EIDL, SBA loans, dischargeable. We've already had several already gone. There's some still in the works with people. Because, again, remember, what's nice about this is equity takes that 1,000-pound gorilla off your shoulder. Mm-hmm. Even after we initially brought equity, got into honor with the IRS, we were still getting offers from them.
Not
in the
presentments,
mail.
but offers.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. It went from presentments down to offers. And, going to the P.O. box and pulling those out, and now knowing what to do with them, got that 1,000-pound gorilla off our shoulders. So that's what we offer people. If you are having some kind of issue, or you haven't filed or done something, for years, and, maybe something, you're going to get something put in front of your face. Anything from a bank. Again, banks don't loan money, so anything to do with a bank, they used the word loan. They didn't loan you anything except maybe the pen to sign your name. Mm-hmm. So when my student says, "Well, I kept the pen," so
what about like mortgages or vehicles too? Because for me, I don't even know if I would want to go down that road at all, just because it sounds like a very tedious process that can last a long time. And it also is a little bit scarier, in my opinion, because it's something that is securitized and it has collateral associated with it. Because it's like, if, they take your car, they repo your car, and then you do end up finally discharging it, like, are you going to get your car back? Probably not.
No. Yeah, possession's 9/10 of the loss. So once they have it, the likelihood of getting it back. I mean, we've had taxing authorities put money back into people's accounts, but that's not the norm. So yeah, you're not going to get back once they have it. Mm-hmm. Most of the time. I tell people not to put where they lay their head at night at risk, mm-hmm. Unless they have to. Most people come to us are already in foreclosure, and that they don't have any choice. I mean, if someone does have a choice, I give them the options. If you have a way of short selling or selling it, and starting over, if you have a way of going to your retirement and catching up your payments, those are options for you to consider because nothing's guaranteed. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned earlier, equity does what it says to do 100% of the time, but there's still a human factor involved there. The other side and us, if we go in there and can't think of what to say to a banker or even to a judge. I mean, there's some states here are non-judicial foreclosure states to where they foreclose in your home and sell it before you ever get to be in front of a judge. Mm-hmm. And that's not the best time to learn how to bring your equity is when you're ready to be evicted. So yes, equity's there. If the next pandemic happens or whatever, and your income, bad word. If the fruits of your labor disappear and you can't make your mortgage payments, equity can have you back there. You'll have the time at that point to go into it, but you're not going to learn this to go discharge mortgages. That's why I say this isn't about just getting out of things. Right. Yes, your house is paid for, but there's also a huge thing about picking your battles. Right. Just because equity doesn't mean you have to use it to discharge a debt. So yes, mortgages. I mean, again, we've had people receive letters saying your mortgage is paid off, or the bank just goes silent, and their acquiescence is their agreement that you can stay in your home for the rest of your life. But again, it's most of the time it's gonna be a process to where you need to be on it. Mm-hmm. Going down there and potentially talking to the public trustee or whoever's starting a foreclosure process. Inquiries with the bank, and if there is a court involved, inquiring, compelling performance that way. Mm-hmm.
I think let's touch on that just one more time, that equity inquires to compel the performance that you want in that situation, right? So we're asking questions of these various entities in order to compel performance. Can you just expand upon that a little bit?
Sure. So when we bring equity to a matter, let's use a credit card for statement, for example. Everybody look at your credit card. At the bottom of it is that little coupon or voucher with a little pair of scissors and a dotted line. Brings up, if you look at the definition of voucher in Black's Law Dictionary, the first two words in the definition of voucher is a receipt. A receipt. So they're giving us all the money to pay what we cannot pay because there's no lawful money on the planet. But when we first bring equity to that statement and send it back to them, giving them the commercial energy to discharge the debt, equity says that matter is done. So the only reason we even have to ask questions to compel performance is if they've dishonored our equity. Mm. Okay. Now there's several reasons why next month you get another credit card statement. And we've had evidence several times of this happening to where we brought equity to a credit card statement. Next month, they get another one, and there's a little interest involved in it. And the next month, and the next month. Well, 10 months later, somebody gets a check back for overpayment.
Wild.
So why would that happen? Well, I mean, the only logical excuse that I can see is that we know that credit card was securitized, that debt was securitized. It's out there being traded in an open market. So that $10,000 credit limit is probably being traded for $90,000, $100,000 on the open market, and maybe it took 10 statements for those vouchers, those receipts, to equal the securitized amount, and there's a little bit of remainderment, so the person gets a check back.
Got it.
And that's happened. Doesn't happen all the time, but it has happened.
Wow, that's so interesting.
So that's why it's not just they're just not necessarily ignoring it, which it could be. I mean, you send your credit card payment in with a check, and there's a warehouse full of how many desks with people opening up. If they don't see a check, they mark it not paid.
Especially because the overwhelming majority are not going to understand this until it gets to some tippy top where there's some person in the know, and it's like, well, technically speaking.
And they're not going to say that.
Right, exactly. Shit, just send that one to me.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's what happens. Yeah. Great. And that brings up a really good point, is it's not our job to teach them this law. Mm-hmm. If you're teaching law, then you're practicing law without a quote unquote license, which there is no license to practice law. You're just not a member of the club. Right. George Carlin, the big club, and we ain't in it. And so that said, is that we have, we just have to do it right. And equity tells us how to do it right.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Hey y'all, I'm here with Melissa Kupsch from Remedy Academy of Homeopathy. We are so stoked here at the Way Forward to be partnering with Melissa and Remedy in order to spread the message of homeopathy across the world, and also to partner on the eventual development of healing centers across the United States.
People are pretty quickly coming to realize that frequency is the future of medicine. We are witnessing the great resurgence of homeopathy right now. We're really moving away from that suppressive medical model. Whether it's for eczema, asthma, hormones, fertility, anxiety, depression, trauma, whatever it is, it all starts as energy in the person's field first. If we change our field, we can completely change our life. Our 2-year academy is open worldwide to anyone who wants to become a homeopath. We've got 5 lecturers and we currently have over 500 students enrolled, which is record numbers in our field. A career in homeopathy is amazing for anyone who wants flexibility in their work and who wants to be valuable in creating this new world. We have stay-at-home parents enrolled. We have ex-medical professionals, grandparents signed up who want to learn how to heal their grandchildren and pass on that invaluable knowledge. We even have husband and wife teams. So my husband enrolled in the course with no prior knowledge of health as a background, and he is loving it.
Kylie is also enrolled as well, so my partner is, and she's so stoked to become a homeopath and to be helping to spread this message across the world.
The thing that we hear from so many of our students is, I found my thing. Homeopathy is the key. We harness frequencies from nature and we alter the field of all creations. So if anybody wants to join us or they want to know more about it, they can visit our website.
Yeah, and all that information will be in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about Remedy Academy, also Remedy Collective, also some of the homeopathic products that they have, please just head to the show notes. All of that will be listed there. Most healthcare today operates on an outdated mechanistic model, treating the body like a battlefield rather than a self-healing system. You wait months for an appointment only to receive a rushed diagnosis that labels you rather than truly understanding your unique health. Even in holistic health, many practitioners rely on endless lab tests and supplement protocols, addressing symptoms instead of the root cause. And the result? Another prescription or supplement regimen that merely suppresses or masks symptoms rather than facilitating true healing, whether the imbalance was physical, emotional, energetic, or a mix of all three. And that's why Dr. Tom Cowan co-founded the New Biology Clinic, to offer something radically different. As one of the most respected natural health doctors in the world, Dr. Cowan has spent decades challenging conventional medicine and advancing a deeper understanding of human biology, water, and natural health. His work isn't just about rejecting the mainstream, it's about offering a more truthful, biologically coherent approach for healing. The New Biology Clinic recognizes that health isn't about fighting disease, it's about restoring balance. You're not a diagnosis, you're an individual with a unique story, and healing should honor that. With virtual consultations available worldwide, the clinic offers a flat-rate monthly membership that gives you direct access to practitioners who take the time to actually listen. Members also get exclusive health live streams, a resource library, and live sessions covering everything from biofield tuning and breathwork to movement and meditation, all designed to support whole body healing. And if you're not ready for a membership, you can book a one-time appointment, sign up for an enrichment-only membership for the healing modalities alone, or schedule a free connection session with one of the care team members to see how the New Biology Clinic can help in your specific situation. This isn't about keeping you dependent on doctors. It's about making you sovereign over your health. Head to newbiologyclinic.com and use code THEWAYFORWARD, and that's spelled The Way, F-O-R-W-A-R-D, for $50 off account activation, or just head to the show notes for more info. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com for $150 off. Your body already knows how to heal, and New Biology Clinic helps you remember. One quick question. What about those, won't name any names, but what about those people who have just never filed to begin with and have been mostly left alone at this point? Doesn't that technically mean that they don't have a contract? They never entered into a contract. They never filled out a 1040, 1041, W-4, or W-9. So there is no valid contract in place with the IRS. I don't want to say that this is legal advice because it's not. None of this episode is legal advice, by the way. But what would be the approach if it were you and you just had been left alone the whole time and no one had ever said anything to you?
And live your life.
Live your life.
And that's my premise to begin with, is live your life. But if they do ever put something in front of your face, then equity is going to have your back and tell you how to handle it honorably. If there's a dollar amount associated with it, to give them the commercial energy to cause discharge and release, two huge words, and but the likelihood, what establishes the estate is the account, then mom or we apply SS5 for a social security number. So if you've never used that number, never volunteered a contract, then the likelihood of you ever being sent offers of presentments is extremely low to nil. But again, if you ever do, then get something, then you'll know how to do it.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I did a whole separate episode with my dear friend Veda Ray on how to approach documentation without even contracting for a birth certificate or social security number to begin with, which is really interesting. Really interesting. Maybe I could link that one in the show notes too.
Yeah, we've got students who have had children after they took the equity course and birthed at home, and no birth certificate, just something in the Bible. If you look at the definition of family Bible, it's where births and deaths are recorded.
Yep.
So that's what, if you feel inspired to, we could or should be using. But again, if not, then there's still remedy and freedom out there.
Amen. Amen to that. Okay, I want to touch on just some other equity principles and remedy discussions. So, from my understanding, equity, if you're in a situation where you do go to court, right? Equity, if you employ it, actually makes you equal with the judge. You're not standing under the judge. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. You said exactly right. Equity makes you equal with the judge or anybody else out there who is testing you, challenging you, giving you offers and presentments. There's no one above us, no one below us. My wife found a saying from an indigenous chief that stand in your circle. When you stand in your circle, no one's above you, no one's below you, no one's around you. We're all equal. We all come from source, God, universe. We're all part of the one. That you've had many people on your podcast make that statement, and I truly believe that's true. But that also means that when you are bringing equity, it is a higher consciousness, it is a higher law form than what they are trying to employ against you. Whether a statute or law, again, they're operating under color. That court document is going to be in your all caps name. Most states put the birth certificates in the all caps name. Not all of them. I know Utah and one other on the East Coast puts an upper lowercase name. It's still a bonded security. So that doesn't matter. You look on your credit cards. Pull out a check out of your checkbook. That's going to be in the all caps name, as well as get a magnifying glass and look at the signature line on a check. It's not a line. It's words. It says something to the effect of authorized representative, and it's done in a 0.8 font. So if they weren't trying to hide something, why would they make the signature line on your checks from your bank words instead of just writing underneath the authorized representative or authorized signature?
Because that's saying that essentially this person or this man or woman that is signing this is the authorized representative for the all caps name estate.
Exactly. The surety.
So wild.
Sure. You signing that check is giving them the commercial energy to do whatever they want to do, unrestricted, because you can't write all rights reserved. At least most banks won't allow that. And giving them the commercial energy to fractionalize banking, to do whatever, to honor or dishonor that check. And, those are two huge words, honor and dishonor.
I had one of the Way Forward members, when we were just on one of our member calls, discuss that she used a magnifying glass on the birth certificate and found a lot of interesting stuff on that as well.
Yep, I've seen that. It's been years. I don't dive too deep down those rabbit holes anymore because I'm looking to be able to give people remedy.
Totally.
You
It's
know,
just interesting though, nonetheless.
Sure.
Like, oh, okay, there's some hidden features in this.
We
let's
have to
say.
touch on the Title 26 stuff and the all caps name stuff and being surety for that. But the bottom line is the remedy is easy. You have rights. They're granted to you by your creator, universe, whatever you believe that to be, and they're unalienable. They can't be taken away unless you allow them to.
Beautiful. I said beautiful a lot this episode because it is. Equity is a very beautiful thing, and you carry it and you share this message so well. So it is very beautiful.
Thank you.
It's been great.
Greatly appreciated.
Another thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm just going to kind of like shotgun different things here. The flow won't be as good, but I'm going to shoot. So conditional acceptances, that's another, I'd say, quote unquote, remedy, big air quotes on that a lot of people have learned and tried to employ. And I'll say for me, when the whole COVID era occurred, I think I was actually taking part. No, I did. This is what we did with the city of Kansas City. I'd actually like to share this a little bit. So myself and a guy by the name of Robert Michael, who I'm no longer really in contact with, but was in contact with at that time. He helped me out tremendously. I will say that we had this event in downtown Kansas City, 650 attendees. We had verbally confirmed with the Kansas City Convention Center that is owned by the city of Kansas City that, hey, if the mask mandate is reinstated, we just want to let you know that we're not going to enforce that amongst our attendees. They verbally confirmed, yes, that's totally fine. We totally understand that. Okay. So like that's a big piece.
Cool.
Event occurs. Mask mandate is reinstated. First day of the event, no issues until around 4 p.m. Someone comes up to us that works for the convention center and says, hey, we've received 3 anonymous complaints, 2 from the staff that are here at the convention center, 1 from someone who's walking by saying that you all are not enforcing the mask mandate. We're going to have to call the public health department to come here and talk with you. And if you guys don't start enforcing this mandate, then we're going to have to shut your event down. Long story short, nothing happened the rest of that day. We went into this back room because we kind of could see the writing on the wall of what's coming. We're like, okay, we doubt they're going to shut us down today, but we're leaving the facility and then going to have to come back tomorrow. Like we need to start writing some notices. And if I remember correctly, and I may be wrong because I've also taken part in other notices in similar situations, we did use some form of conditional acceptance, maybe saying like, if you can prove these things, we're looking up various health codes, but then also going deep into the quote unquote evidence for various aspects of the whole COVID charade. And we sent that notice to the city of Kansas City and then also to various people that were involved that we had already been communicating with as part of the event. At around 11 p.m. that night, and we had sent the notice around 8 p.m., at around 11 p.m. that night, we get a letter from the city of Kansas City's attorney saying this event is terminated. You are in breach of contract. The doors will be locked in the facility tomorrow. You're not coming back in. Now, show up the next morning. I'm freaking out because this is my first time dealing with any of this stuff. This is back in October of 2021, around the same time as right now, actually, that we're recording this episode, which is interesting. But I'm freaking out because I don't know if any of this stuff is legitimate or not. I don't know what's going to happen. And I maybe got 2 hours of sleep that night because my old military self kicks back in and I'm looking at different courses of action. Okay, if it does get shut down, there's a park here. We can get a PA system. Don't know what to do. We have 650 attendees, 26 speakers that have flown in from across the world. And I show up to the convention center at 6 a.m., 2 hours before doors are supposed to open for the event. All the doors are locked. Signs on the door say, contact Health Freedom for Humanity for reimbursement. This event is terminated, something to that effect. That being said, it became clear about an hour and a half later as attendees are starting to arrive and they're like, what's going on? But then also some of the people who work for the city arrived and they were behaving a little bit differently. It became clear that night before, they sent their notice to us without having read our notice. Now this morning, it became clear they read our notice and they were behaving very friendly towards us. They had already done a lot of work to close up the event on the inside, but they're like, hey, we own the park just across. It's a little amphitheater. We can set you up with some speakers, some whatever you need, water. And we're like, they read our notice. So long story short, we end up threatening to sue the city of Kansas City for damages because they were in fact in breach of contract. They ended up paying us the $9,000 we requested. We probably could have requested more, but that's fine. But it showed me that, there's some legitimacy to this whole paradigm. And that's what began my exploration into all of it. So I want to give credit to Robert Michael for that one. But with that being said, conditional acceptances, maybe it worked in that instance, maybe because we were dealing with someone who doesn't really fully understand this. But why, in your from your understanding with respect to equity, is with equity, conditional acceptances not the best approach?
Sure. As you just said, conditional acceptances are not equity because they're saying, if you can prove, they're making a claim, if you can prove this, then I'll comply. So that's a conditional acceptance. And again, yes, I mean, that may work. It's just not equity. So if things are worded right, but you said the magic word, notice. Mm-hmm. Notice is intelligence by whatever means communicated. So, you're saying, hey, show us the law, as somebody else says out there. Well, there's a law there. It's just, whether it's enforceable in tax law. But that's what made them reconsider. I'm surprised they just didn't open up because yes, they, if they were in breach of contract, the contract makes the law and you put them on notice. Now, what equity would have had us do is read the contract and make that either a lunge or something part of that contract, or cross out the mask mandates thing, mm-hmm. and put that contract. Contracts can be changed. And
it wasn't even in the written contract to begin with the facility, which is wild. Okay. So this was all verbally.
Yeah. So there you go. They were in breach of contract, mm-hmm. and you had every right. So what equity would just do is just say, under what authority are you doing this? Where is it in the contract? Just ask the questions that would have removed those signs off the door and had them unlock them and go on with your event as planned. And again, I'm biased with equity, so in my opinion, equity may have done that versus conditional acceptance. I don't know. Again, how many personalities around the world? Judges. This, not one judge is going to respond the same as another judge, or IRS agent, or taxing authority, mm-hmm. or bank, or credit card company. Who knows? It's just
ultimately working with human beings here.
Yes, exactly. The nice part about it is, doesn't matter what they put in front of your face or say to you, equity is going to give us something to say to compel the performance that we wish to happen. So yeah, conditional acceptance is fine. They're just not equity, because equity, with equity, we have a duty to inquire. Mm-hmm. And I say that frequently.
I love it though. I mean, it makes it rings true in my mm-hmm. soul. Like I said, it reverberates inside my body. It makes so much sense.
There's two reasons for inquiry. One, to find out something that's not known, and the other is to compel performance. And we use them both. Yeah. If we in court, judge, could you please have the plaintiff render the account? Well, every time they put a statement in front of you, they're rendering an account on your credit card, mortgage, whatever. They're rendering an account, which is an agreed balance between the parties. Because we're not going to argue. We're not going to say validate the debt. No, we're going to give them the commercial energy to discharge it. So it's an agreed balance between the parties, which is an account stated. They put an account stated in front of you. So if something happens to go to court, judge, could you please have the plaintiff render the account? He tells you to go to a room, the next room over and work it out. They put, you owe this amount in it. You bring equity to it, accept it, date it, sign it like is shown. Go back in the courtroom. Judge, does the court's record reflect that I've accepted and returned the irrevocable offer of the plaintiff in this matter and returned it to them for settlement and closure? The next words out of the judge's mouth is, okay, case dismissed.
Wow.
Should be. Again, they're bankers, so they may question you on it. And they also have a duty to make sure that we're not downloading stuff off the internet and bringing some of this crazy stuff that they're probably getting umpteen times a week, because someone just found something on the internet. They have a duty and a right to ask us and test us. And, we need to pass that test. And, we don't testify in court. we do a special appearance, which is a reservation of rights. And, Judge, I'm not here to testify. How am I settled this today? That's not here to argue, not here to testify. If the plaintiff says I owe something, hey, could you please put it in writing and, be sure they sign it, and I'll honor it immediately. Honoring it does not mean writing a check necessarily. Mm-hmm. It's one way to discharge it. You can't pay it. One way to discharge it is to write a check, but that's not the only way.
Boom.
According to their books.
According to their books, that's the biggest thing too.
Yeah, it's not.
I mean, in this third class, I was just blown away how many ways you were validating according to their own books exactly the things you're saying. It just blew me away. I had to pause multiple times and go show my wife, like, oh my gosh, look at this part. Just look at this part. It was amazing. It was amazing. On that note, with conditional acceptances, just real quick, even though it may work sometimes, and in this case with the city of Kansas City, it worked, and it blew me away because we're a small organization. We don't know up from down at that time, and it worked. But with that being said, something that definitely bothers me about the idea of conditional acceptances is saying that, yeah, I will accept this thing. No, I won't. I won't accept that thing. Like, I don't want to do that thing. Like even putting that out there, I will accept this thing if you can provide this evidence. Like in most cases, you're writing it in such a way that they're not going to be able to provide that evidence. But even just the energy behind, I will accept this thing that you're trying to impose upon me, this health measure, like this vaccine, this thing like that, rather than asking questions to compel the performance that upholds your rights that are granted to you from God.
Well, you used it in a correct way because it wasn't in the contract.
Right.
So the problem with a lot of people out there trying to use it on a credit card debt, validate the debt, or, I'll send you a check if you can validate the debt. They don't have to validate the debt. There's a contract. It's in the contract. You will send a certain amount every month, or else. So that's the difference. The contract makes the law. So yes, there's nothing wrong with contracting, but know what it says. And, if something comes up or you're, learn this down the road, you're learning it now. Now equity still has your back because, one of the maxims I use is equity. Here's one of the maxims I remember. Equity corrects errors. What does that tell us? Equity can travel in time, to go back in time and fix something that we did wrong in the past. Huge. And one of those is our equitable right of rescission that we talked about already. The unmaking of a contract from the beginning, not merely a termination.
Yeah, see, that's a really important point there too, is not terminating the contract. It's completely dissolving the contract from its initial conception.
Mm-hmm. And we have to act as though, so someone asks you about it and they say, well, no, that contract no longer exists. No, our words matter. That contract does not exist, or that agreement or the document does not exist.
Yeah.
And the definition goes further to where there needs to be a legal cause for us to use. Well, so they're mixing legal with equity, but what would be a legal cause? Well, there's three of them besides the et cetera in the Black's Law Dictionary. One's fraud, which again, is very hard to prove. It's not equity. And when you make the accusation, now you got to prove it. And it's very hard to prove.
If you're accusing them of fraud.
And again, with the maxim that they'll go by is that, your signature's on it. So you just enjoined yourself in the fraud. Mm-hmm. Now, again, the people will get all upset about that, but it's, that's something that a tool they can use to rule against you. You signed it. You signed the contract. So it removed the error. And so fraud's one of them for rescission. Another one's impossibility. The example I use is you'd sign a contract to drive someone to the moon. Okay, we're not in the Jetsons yet. And the third one is mistake. Nobody can tell you that you did not make a mistake signing, handing over, presenting a document that you signed. And that's our legal cause for rescission. And we're not asking for permission. That's our equitable right. It says it right there in Black's.
Maybe it's appropriate now to just move into some of the success stories that you've had from some of the people who are members of Freedom with Equity. And one that has really stood out to me that I'd like to start with is someone who who learned through you, who was a part of the whole January 6th fiasco. And the reason that stands out to me is we can get into conversations all day surrounding the incident that was January 6th. And I have my own opinions on Trump and just the government in general, the quote unquote sides of the political spectrum, but we're setting all that aside. I think most of us can recognize that there was a lot of lawfare. And what I mean by that is using the law inappropriately, even according to their own codes, acts, and statutes, with respect to the people that were present on January 6th that were thrown in jail. Like it's really messed up, actually. It's incredibly messed up. I think it is okay to use the term corrupt in that case. There's a lot of corruption involved with a lot of that. So someone using equity in order to bring remedy and not be thrown in jail with respect to this is a big deal. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And I had two January 6th people that I was making suggestions for and helping. One of them, one January 6th that I heard of that I wasn't helping, but one of my cohorts was helping, actually had that their charges dropped. Another one, again, that I wasn't helping, received a plea deal that he couldn't refuse just to get that 1,000-pound gorilla off his shoulders and to be done with it because it's got stretched out. Again, because of the lawfare, the corruption, as well as the commercial side of this, those bonds are being traded in the open market. So they're making millions and billions of dollars off of this thing. Anytime they charge somebody, there's a charge. And charges just simply need to be discharged. Okay. And equity, it's right in Black's Law Dictionary, discharge and equity practice. If you understand that paragraph, exactly how to do it. Not exactly, but it gives us a really good indication of where to go. And so the two January 6 people that were members of freedomwithequity.com, we didn't even have the website back then, but one of them was a young man who was not even 18 years old yet, charged, and started to bring equity, receiving a lot of bad suggestions, I think, from his attorneys. I gave him a couple things to even ask the attorneys because he went to court and just could not stand up to this federal judge. It just completely overruled him, just because of his young age, I believe. And so we went back into having an attorney representing them, and they did horrible. But I told them, ask your attorneys to ask the judge, where, they were all charged under 18 USC and Title 40. I said, have your attorney ask the judge where 18 USC and the specific charges were actually promulgated in the Federal Register. And the attorneys wouldn't do it because they know that 18 USC, this is my research, the first few pages of it are promulgated. All of these charges are in the thousands of pages afterwards.
Wow. That
are not promulgated. And
wow.
Again, I could be wrong on it, but that's what I've been told and found.
You suggested that to this kid, and then he tried to do it with the attorneys, and they're like, no,
can't do that.
That's interesting.
You hire an attorney, and again, we've heard this before that their first priority is to the court. Their second loyalty is to their fruits of their labor. Their business, their firm. Third is to the public, and you're fourth or fifth down the totem pole.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to do something that's going to affect the first three or four. So the other thing is when you hire an attorney, you're telling that court, that judge, that system that you're incompetent to handle your own affairs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying not to hire an attorney if you need to. But they're not representing you; they're representing the fiction that you're the surety for, the one liable to pay. So that's why the fiction gets charged, and you have to write the check, or the fiction gets charged, and you go behind bars because you're the surety for it. That debt, that charge is getting discharged one way or another, either with you behind bars with the bonds discharging the debt, or with you writing a check if it's a civil matter. Everything's civil though, even criminal. We've had judges say that this isn't a civil case. You can't bring equity. This is criminal. You're facing 5 years in prison. Judge, are there bonds associated with this case? Judge, in fact, Judge, why does this case number have a QSIP number associated with it? So you see, you can't just stand silent.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have something to say. You don't want to be a smart aleck. You have to be confident, but not arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do that, then just like I proved in my case dismissed. So this one, attorneys talked to this one kid about doing just a in-hearing trial, no jury or anything, and he got sentenced to 5 years in prison at 18 years old. I think he got out earlier because of Trump or some other issues. I don't know the whole story. The other January 6th defendant was very, very popular, made national news, had a bullhorn, things like that at the Capitol, and brought in equity, the state in equity pretty much the whole time. Not initially, but then he found us and started learning equity and brought equity, and didn't do everything perfectly, and he made some mistakes at the end, and wound up going to prison. But he still thanks equity because he should have gotten much longer than he did, and
Mm-hmm.
what he did get was on the thing that was being, whatever that rule was, that they were overcharging and not using what's the evidence that they use. I can't remember the name of it, but they were leaving things out.
Got it.
So that whatever that law was that they charged him with was going to get thrown out by the Supreme Court because it was getting challenged. So he even still comes in the classes. You'll see him in the course, in the sessions, and he lives and breathes equity.
Wow.
So he said even when the short time he was in, he was talking to people about equity the whole time. He was in.
That's the thing that's really important to understand, is that these people came to you when they were already in a crazy emergency too.
Sure.
So the learning curve to really get equity right, especially in this dire situation, is pretty steep, I'd imagine.
And the judges are under so much pressure to put these people in jail or prison that this judge knew he wasn't, this last guy's judge knew this person told me that the judge was about crying when he left the bench on one hearing.
Wow.
A phrase that he came up with. It's a maxim that I didn't even know about until he found it, because obviously, when you're in the thick of things, you're going to be doing the research too. So he found this maxim that says, and he asked this question with this judge, does the court's record reflect that the ignorance of the judge is the misfortune of the innocent?
Wow.
That's a maxim.
Wow.
So very, very powerful.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's out, he's rebuilding his life, but he was also, these poor January 6 people were super attacked, not just from that angle, but usually the IRS runs 3 to 4 accounts, different centers. You might get something from Holtsville, Atlanta, Ogden, whatever, Atlanta, Austin. Is it Austin? And this guy had 9 separate centers that he was having to reply with equity to from the IRS, and
wow.
they all disappeared.
Wow.
So
that's amazing.
He used it because he was a January 6th defendant. He got attacked by the local commissioners because it's business, and they found some rule. He went in there and started asking the equitable questions, and the attorneys for the county wouldn't even come down to protect the commissioners, and everything got turned around.
So this is after he got out. He started.
No, this was while everything was still going on.
Okay.
He was out. I mean, he bonded out.
Yeah.
But no, this was during
wow.
the whole process, because he was just under such scrutiny.
Yeah, because that's how it happens, right? Especially with something that is a national news situation like that every agency is going to be gunning for you and checking their relationship to you. Like, is this guy done
even
anything?
down to the local level, which was crazy.
That's crazy. But he used equity to resolve all that stuff. That's incredible.
He's very, very proud of it. Very proud of it.
Amazing.
And we have numerous stories.
Well, that's what I wanted to get into next, is just like share some of the other stories that you have as well.
So another one of my first students was being sued for $2 million. He ran the QSIP on, just to give you information on the money that they're making on this. The QSIP fund for that lawsuit case number was involved with. He was being sued for $2 million. The QSIP showed $4 billion that it was being traded for in the open market. That's the money. And our understanding is the judges aren't getting paid directly from these, but indirectly. So, another question, if you happen to be in this situation, Judge, is it ethical and moral for you to be adjudicating a case when my rights, my property, maybe my freedom are in peril, when you have a financial interest in this matter, whether it be direct or indirect? So again, the only reason we're having to ask these questions, as I mentioned, is because they've already disarmed your equity. The equity discharges that as soon as you bring equity to the matter. So if you charged with something, with a traffic citation or something more, when you bring equity to that, equity says that matter's settled and closed. But if they don't, then now they're in dishonor. So that's why we're having to ask these questions, to put them on the spot, so to speak, and ask the questions that they don't or can't or don't want to answer, to compel performance. Because again, you're in honor. Once you brought equity to it, you are the one in honor. Mm-hmm. You've discharged the charge with using their rules, not stating them, but using them. And that matter's done and over with. Mm-hmm. If they don't, equity tells us what to do to put them into dishonor.
Amazing. And as far as IRS related issues, things like this, I'd imagine you have a lot of students who've had tremendous success with that. I know you've had a few because I've communicated with them. So
sure. Tremendous amount. Again, the IRS, they have a duty to protect the emergency from 1933, or the ATO, or the CRA, or whatever country you're in. And the individual agents may not know, but as this gets higher up into a thing, then eventually it's going to get to somebody to where they're at, the agents or people who are putting in front of you're putting your equity in front of their face. It's going to say, okay, what do we do with this? And, to date, we have obviously people who are still dealing with the IRS. It took, 2 years to get them out of our lives. And, but it's 100%, success rate with that. And again, with many still in the works. One gentleman's, was in patriot warfare for 18 years before he found equity. I'm not a taxpayer, doing all these things. And, so he's about 2 years in and still getting some offers and presentments. But I mean, they're showing signs of getting to leave him alone. I guess is the best way to stay private with that and let people know that it works.
Amazing.
The IRS knows there's no lawful money on the planet. They know we can't pay for anything, and there's other ways to discharge debts. It's in their books.
Amazing. Okay, so if someone is listening to or watching this episode and is interested to learn more, I've linked in the show notes the link for them to book a free consultation with you. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Our website's freedomwithequity.com. We're new to this space, so please be patient with us. I'm not involved. I mean, I'm involved, but again, the trust and everything is not owned by us. It's run by a trustee and so forth. And so we're just getting the website together over the last.
Because you've been doing stuff offline, sort of word of mouth up until this point, right?
Just word of mouth. Yeah. And again, I came up with my vision is to change the consciousness of the planet to a more equitable, fair system, whether it's judicial or banking or whatever. And, I realize I've got to talk to people, put this in front of more people's face. So, yes, everything's new. But yes, you can go to the website. I just started a Telegram for people to come in and start to ask questions. The webmaster just put that on the website today. And, but even then you can send us an email, freedomwithequity@proton.me, and talk with me. You can go to the website, become a member. It's $4.99 a month. for the PMA part of that a member, I don't even like to use membership because that goes, shipping term, be careful of the words that we use, the commercial terms. Babies are birthed, even though it's spelled differently, it's still commercial term, getting into that commerce thing. So, but yes, send me an email. Be happy to speak with you for 15 minutes. No consult honorarium or costs, just to see if this resonates with you. If you have a particular situation, you just want to hear my voice or talk to me. This is what I do. I talk to people about equity.
You do it very well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Andrew.
My pleasure. Honored to be here. Grateful to be here. Very humbling. Very humbled to be here with you.